to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mayor Ed Honey,
Here.
Mayor Tom Murphy,
Here.
General Ted Maxwell,
Here.
Mayor Joe Winfield,
Here.
Supervisor Rex Scott,
Here.
Chairman Peter Yucapicio, Mayor Regina Romero,
Here.
Mayor Paul Diaz.
You. I'll move to item number 3, Mr. Zinda.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We currently do not have any speakers for call to the audience.
All right, thank you. Go on to item number 4 now. Approval of the March 23.
Move to approve.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes. Thank you. Go on to number 5, consent items. Staff.
Mr. Chair, there's no action on this item. It's for information unless anybody has any questions.
Okay, information. Proceed with it.
Yep. Again, if there are any questions, we can move on to the next item, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely.
Item 6, that is our standard MOU between PAG and RTA for PAG to manage the RTA and all the financial aspects of the RTA. So we request the approval of that MOU.
Questions?
So move. Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Ayes. Thank you. Go on to the next item.
Mr. Chair, Jamie Brown's going to give a brief presentation on item 7, and that is an action item. We request your approval.
Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council. It's my pleasure to present a brief overview of the PAG fiscal year 2024 and 2025 overall work program, or OWP. In terms of OWP related updates that we provided to committees and funding partners. So as you may remember, back in November and December, we provided our first updates to you about the OWP and our process. In March, we also provided an update as well as the draft to the management committee, the TPC, and the regional council. We also coordinated with ADOT on the completion of the revenue and expenditure tables. And once those were completed, we shared the full draft overall work program with our state and federal funding partners. And those include ADOT, Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration. And that was done in early April. And then based on the feedback we received, we incorporated changes. So because I've provided information about the OWP in previous presentations, I'm going to skip ahead to the revenue and expenditure tables. So these are the same structure as previous years. So for each fiscal year, there are 6 tables. And it's important for us to emphasize that we have not increased member agency dues in this OWP, and nor have we in recent years. And we are not changing the amount of federal and state funding programs in the table for the OWP. So table 1 shows funds available. It includes what we anticipate being available as new funding as well as any carry forward. And you can see that it's broken down by federal at the top. So that includes metropolitan planning funds that come directly to PAG as an MPO and other federal sources, state funds in the middle, including an ADEQ grant for TRP related activities, and then local revenues, including RTA revenues that support our program. For local share, again, we're not seeing an increase in our dues, so this is identical to the previous or the current OWP. And again, I'm just showing fiscal year 2024, but in this case, again, it's identical in 25. Table 3 shows the total revenue by program area. So this is basically an extension of table 1, but again, broken down by work elements such as transportation activities or air quality or RTA support. So it's more detailed than table 1. Table 4 shows the total expenditures by program area, again, broken down by work elements, including integrated watershed planning, economic vitality, safety and security, and many others. So you can see personnel related expenses, employee related expenses, and others on table 4. Table 5 shows the staff allocation that's budgeted for PAG by program area. So you see for transportation activities, the number of FTEs anticipated, as well as other program areas, for a total of 55 and a half. And this is the same for fiscal year 2025 as well. Table 6 shows the capital equipment and consultants, including pass-through funding for items that have a cost of $5,000 or greater. Some highlights of Table 6 include continuation of programs that some of you are familiar with, including our roadway safety assessment program. And we appreciate the partnership we have with our member agencies on that really important program. We're going to continue to partner with the University of Arizona Economic Business and Research Center on forecasting data that informs the PAG transportation travel demand model. We're also going to continue to collaborate regionally on aerial orthophoto imagery collection, and also collaborate regionally on pavement condition data collection. We're also going to be programming new carbon reduction funding on eligible regional activities, including a regional active transportation plan, modeling development data that can support an active transportation plan, as well as our air quality modeling, microtransit service analysis, and orthophoto feature extraction. So I mentioned the orthophotos. We'd like to use a tool that can incorporate AI to extract physical characteristics of from the orthophotos, such as bike paths, sidewalks, curbs, and others, to inform an asset inventory for the active transportation plan. And it's important to note that these strategies and initiatives that are eligible for carbon reduction program funding were reviewed and approved by ADOT and/or Federal Highway Administration staff. So just to summarize, and these few bullets incorporate items I've shared previously. The OWP is federally required, and each new OWP builds on a current regional council approved OWP. The OWP serves as the basis of the work program agreement between PAG and ADOT that includes federally required activities for MPOs, such as our long-range regional transportation plan and our TIP. And the work program agreement is in effect for 24 months beginning on July 1st, 2023. So with that, Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council, happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Chair.
And then we'll go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. Wanted to call attention to the draft OWP plan, page 14 in goal 3, title 6, and environmental justice planning and compliance. This is the conversation that we have had at this table. PAG is doing minimal work on environmental justice planning and compliance. And based on what I see on the draft, the strategy is to develop an annual Title VI plan and report in partnership with ADOT. Can you expand? Because that, in my opinion, is lacks clarity and any detail on the work that needs to be done, environmental justice planning and compliance.
Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council, Mayor Romero, thank you for that question. I'll start with the response and others can jump in, but I believe this goal and strategy are consistent with the current OWP, and we leave out the details because my understanding is that sometimes these requirements change. And the requirements for Title VI and environmental justice come to us from ADOT. So that by keeping it light, we leave flexibility for the requirements from ADOT to come to us and be flexible. So with that, Mr. Mohini or David would like to.
It keeps it light, but also it doesn't set goals. Part of the OWP is to set goals. And so it is very light in terms of what are the goals for Title VI, environmental justice planning and compliance. I don't think it's appropriate to not add any further information or strategies. Goal 4 in terms of developing a multimodal components of the long range RMAP has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 strategies. And based on input that I have given at this table about how slim any detail of environmental justice planning and to continue having such a lengthy strategy is contrary to what a PAG board member has been asking this organization to do. So
Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, as part of this document, we outline outcomes. So the product, that is the outcome, the product comes to the regional council on annual basis for review and approval. That's the report itself. Along those lines, within that report, we identify how that document is integrated into any other document. So the long range plan, for example, that document by itself integrates all the goals and objectives as well. So those are all not standalone. This is everything we do. Every single product integrates Title VI requirements into it. But the document that comes to this body annually for approval, that's the document that this is required, that we identify that we will.
I understand that this is the required course, Title VI and environmental justice planning compliance is required from any MPO and planning organization. But I've brought this time and time again. And for us to have such a flimsy one sentence strategy on something that is really very, very important is completely unacceptable. And it's not a new thing that I brought to this table. It just seems like a cut and paste type of work on this. In partnership with ADOT is good, but there are 8 communities here represented. There should be some community engagement with all of our jurisdictions on what environmental justice planning and compliance means. So I don't understand why we haven't expanded, especially on the request of a PAG board member.
Mr. Chair, again, my response is that the document itself is what's referenced here, and that report will come to you in the future for review and approval. So if there is any opportunity to expand on the document itself, that's the document we're referencing.
Mr. Chair, so I'm sorry.
This on the item though?
Yes.
Okay.
So sort of my understanding would be, this would be the overall, for lack of a better term, contract, so to speak, the umbrella, and then
Blanket.
all the sort of the blanket of it, and then additional documents would come back to us, breaking down each of these areas to.
Yes, sir. It's just a checklist of these things will be prepared over the next 2 years. And
That will come back.
And they will come through throughout the next 2 years. Right?
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, we'll move on to my point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, different issue. I'm going to real quick comment on that one before we go on. I understand the mayor's concern because it says Title VI and environmental justice planning, and then the only strategies got to do with Title VI. So I'm good with this as it's written today. What I'd suggest is that going forward, we just take a look at that and see if there's any strategy that we can put in. It may be fairly straightforward on what you do. It's not, I mean, I understand where there's 2 things in that line and we've only got a strategy for one. That makes sense. My question, and Jamie, appreciate the brief, but this is probably going to go to the executive director, is in the appendix 1, when you take a look at the organizational chart. I'm just curious on, and I've always been confused on this, and so I'm asking for clarification. And it will be an issue on one of our later agenda items when we start talking about the potential 360 review for the executive director. I'm confused where the PAG legal counsel fits in on that calendar. So my understanding is the contract that PAG legal counsel has is directly with the board, yet it's showing under the executive director. Not a big deal if the legal counsel is going to be included in the 360, but in some of the past conversations, we thought the legal counsel wouldn't be included in the 360 because he reports and serves to the board. So I'm just trying to get clarification on if that org chart's correct, or if there's a better place should the PAG legal counsel sit in between the executive director and the board.
Mr. Chair.
I mean, I understand that he also, as part of his duties to the board, gives you legal advice.
So the best way I can describe it is contract services. All contract services obviously are overseen by the executive director. So since legal services is a contract, it's overseen by the executive director. But as far as providing legal advice to you, yes, that's directly reported to you for legal advice.
Thank you for that clarification. And also, as I understand in past conversations we've had, is PAG legal counsel's not a direct report to the executive director.
Because it's a contract service, yes.
Okay, thank you.
It's not an employment relationship, it's a contract relationship.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
I
Get
do
back to
have-
that question.
I do have questions related to the item.
Well, I just had, if I could ask Mayor Romero a couple of questions, should have asked you at lunch.
The last.
No, on this, is it Title VI is the issue you have with the document?
Title VI and environmental justice planning compliance. We brought up this information, these questions before regarding Title VI and the expansion of environmental justice planning and compliance. And the reason we bring this up is that the PAG is responsible to plan on how it affects people environmentally and in terms of public health and quality, air quality, et cetera. And so this is an important issue that I brought to the table several times and asked several times that we expand the work that is being done in this area, and it hasn't.
Let me ask you another question then, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Do you think we've had shortcomings in the past? And what do you propose? You know, Title VI cannot dominate the entire agreement. And I think all of us want to be environmentally safe and fair to everybody in our communities and in the community as a whole. I haven't really heard of any big shortcomings in regard to this. You know, if we had some major issues, and I'm kind of like General Maxwell, I will support it as it is. And I understand we need to be careful what we're doing, but I don't perceive how to expand it much more.
Well, that is something that our executive director should be attending to. I don't know why I would have to explain something that is a responsibility of this organization to put together. But if you, I am kind enough to respond to your question. Environmental justice planning is how infrastructure affects people and communities and neighborhoods. And so when we're talking about Title VI and environmental justice planning, it's something that the federal government requires planning organizations to do and to take into account. And so my question is, why is this so thin in the future work program, when in fact I have asked, as a jurisdiction, I've asked that we expand the strategy that we're using for environmental justice planning, just in compliance with the federal government, but also to align ourselves to the work that the federal government is focusing on. That's Justice 40 and other issues in terms of how infrastructure affects communities, or lack of infrastructure affects communities. So that's all I'm asking for, that this has been very thin. I've requested it several times, and there has been no response to our requests.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, again, that is the detailed information that will be provided in the long-range plan itself. That document takes.
Yes, sir, I understand. You don't have to explain to me what I already know and what you've already said. What I'm asking for is that there is very little lack of information and goal setting for this item. And I just find it unacceptable.
Anything else? And I will move on to.
Well, I was going back to that same point that the way I perceive this is we do have agreement. This is something that's important and it's something that we are going to work on. And the additional work that will come before us when these goals are moving forward to be implemented, where I think sort of the rubber meets the road or the meat on the bone or whatever will be played out. That's at least that's my understanding. I would see if we didn't have this as a overarching goal, then maybe that would be more of a concern. But I think there's agreement that these are the things that we want to work on. And then with the expectation that we'll have additional plans and documents coming before us in the future.
I appreciate Mayor Romero raising these concerns, and I would imagine, Mr. Mogimi, that there is some kind of clearinghouse for the sharing of best practices by MPOs. I'd like to request that when we get some kind of direction in terms of the next Title VI plan and also long-term planning in the area of environmental justice, that we get some examples from other MPOs in terms of how they're addressing those two areas of policy. That would be helpful, I think, in terms of sparking thoughts in terms of how we might address those two areas in future planning.
Mr. Chair, if I may, thank you. Yes, so David and Jamie have been working on that. As Jamie mentioned earlier, a lot of that guideline comes through ADOT. So we want to be making sure that we're consistent with ADOT's requirement, but it's a two-way street with ADOT. We can say, what about this? What about that? So that conversation is ongoing with ADOT.
That I appreciate, but if we could also look at MPOs outside of the boundaries of the state of Arizona in terms, again, of those best practices in those two areas of policy.
So we can recommend that to ADOT. Yeah.
I saw those from the mayor.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And I have two thoughts. One, I'm going to address that last. I understand that you're looking for ADOT for guidance. ADOT's got their OWP. It doesn't have to be the same cookie cutter for each MPO. Each MPO can do as they see fit too. So I don't think to say we're waiting for ADOT's guidance is appropriate in this situation. What I did hear you say, Executive Director, is that you have a plan. You have a strategy. I mean, you just explained it to us. So I guess what I'd say, the quick solution, and it doesn't have to happen today, but is put that strategy down here. The strategy you've got listed on here is for the Title VI piece of that goal. Strategy for the next one could be as simple as develop annual consideration of environmental justice planning and compliance within the long range plan, because that's where you said it's going to be. So we just list it. And now to the mayor's concern, there's a strategy for Title VI and there's a strategy for environmental justice. OWP's done and we've moved on.
Yeah.
Now that may not be sufficient, but it's an easy start.
Just to follow up on what Ted has outlined as a possible solution to including in this draft paper is that we include that language. And I absolutely 100% completely agree that it is not just ADOT. ADOT requests that planning organizations put together their work plan that includes Title VI and environmental justice planning and compliance. That's why we have committees in PAG that work on issues like this. Did any PAG committees work on Title VI and environmental justice planning? Was anyone able to give feedback and input on the overall work program, and very specifically this piece?
The Chair, Mayor Romero, again, it's each document that's produced by PAG. We're talking the long range plan, we're talking about TIP, we're talking about any other document that's produced by PAG has to go through Title VI review and compliance, and every single document goes through a separate committee process before it's finalized. So going back to what you had said, it's not just our map, it's everything we do.
Mr. Chair, sorry.
For this issue, yeah.
With
Mayor Honan.
And we can phrase it that way.
Well, and that's the point. You've got a plan. My concern is by not having that statement there, everybody's gonna go, oh, they don't care about, that's not true. It's right there, one of our goals. So I think, Executive Director, you have a plan. It's just transferring that language in and then this conversation.
Mr. Chair, is there a possibility, since we are looking at the draft plan and since we do give direction based on what we have in front of us, and it is draft, so we can add, would we be able to add that language that Ted has suggested we add to this particular goal?
Sure, that's,
I was gonna recommend if we can amend it to include that.
Yeah. it's
Well,
easy
I
like
like the
that.
language that you used to add into the strategy.
And Mr. Chair, what I'd do then is that I'd move that the executive director develop a line, a strategy to demonstrate how PAG and your plan addresses or will address the plan.
We'll do that.
Then I think
That's-
it's clear in everybody's.
That's
Environmental
easy enough to
justice.
do. It's just expanding on what we already do. Yes.
Exactly. So you're already doing, that's the.
We need a motion.
So there's a motion.
Oh, you don't need a motion?
He said he would do it.
Well, he made a motion. I'll second the motion if we just want to,
For the record.
for the record.
Yeah.
Thomas, do you think that's appropriate if we just? It solidifies it, so to speak, that was.
So there's a motion and a second.
All
Just
in
for,
favor?
just further, just,
That,
sure, we can do that.
favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
Mr. Chair, the reason that I bring up this particular piece of the OWP is because when it comes to Title VI and environmental justice planning and compliance, it is very close to the carbon reduction program and the funds that we have in that particular piece of the transportation systems management and operations. I'm sorry, below the carbon reduction program. It connects with each other. If there's very little discussion and planning on Title VI and environmental justice planning and compliance, then there's very little conversation as to what happens with the carbon reduction program and what our committees and the PAG could potentially plan on. So I do have a couple of questions about the carbon reduction program. So I just want to make sure that this is the appropriate time for me to do that. It seems that there's annual new funding through the carbon reduction program. And it's 2.33 million. I also understand there's a formula allocation from the federal government indicating how much we will get from the state of Arizona over a 5-year period. How much is PAG projected to receive over the next 5 years for this region?
Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, so the most recent transportation infrastructure bill that passed authorized that allocation, which is a sub-allocation to PAG. So it's roughly $2 million sub-allocated by the state to PAG. And the bill is only valid for 5 years. And there's 3 years of that remaining. So after the bill expires, obviously we have to look into what future bills accommodate. But for this plan, both years, there is roughly 2.1, is it?
2.338.
There you go. You have that number. The number you have, 2.33, is the amount that's allocated by the state to the region.
And that amount is for year 1 and 2 or year 1?
Each year.
So there's going to be 2.3 million each year.
Correct.
And it's scheduled to come in over a 5-year program, correct?
Again, unfortunately, I think the bill expires in 3 years, so it's only the balance of the 3 years, correct? When does the bill expire?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the bill should expire in 2026. So beginning 2027, no more partisan infrastructure laws.
So for the next 3 years, we are going to receive $2.3 million for the carbon reduction program.
Correct.
What committees of the PAG work on this carbon reduction program?
So again, The OWP is a checklist of what we will accomplish over the next 2 years. As we discussed, the state is developing a plan. Their plan is due in November of 2023. Once the plan is developed by the state, then we begin to do our work to make sure that whatever we do is aligned with the state. And that process.
Committee, sir, what committee of the PAG works on allocating the carbon reduction program monies?
Ideally, when the time comes, it'll be most likely between several committees, not just one committee. The air quality subcommittee is probably the most immediate committee that would be involved. And then from there might be other committees that they would receive recommendations.
So this allocation for this year, which is $2.338 million. Next year, we will receive another possibly $2.3 million.
Correct.
The air quality committee from the PAG is who sits on the air quality committee?
Every jurisdiction has a member on the air quality subcommittee.
Have they been meeting?
It's an ad hoc as needed committee. I believe that met probably once in the last year or so, but now they're going to be able to meet more often.
Will the PAG board know when this committee starts meeting?
Of course. Yeah.
Already. Is there a possible timeline for us to know when they meet?
As I mentioned, it's an ad hoc committee. They meet as needed. So once we begin this process, they'll be meeting over the next 2 years.
So we are possibly going to approve an OWP budget that we don't know what's going to happen with that money in 23, 24. I mean, in 24, 25.
ADOT's plan is due by November. Once we have ADOT's plan, then we have to align our plan with ADOT's plan. Between now and November, it's mostly the logistics of making sure we're aligned, we're ready to go. Data collection is consistent with ADOT's plan. They had already indicated that we can utilize some of those funds for mapping, data collection, and being able to get ourselves ready for when their plan comes up. We have a good feeling what's going to be included in their plan. So that alignment needs to be confirmed after November when their plan is complete.
But the $2.33 million coming into our region, there should be engagement and input from the Air Quality Committee into how we spend these funds. Are you telling us that for 24-25, you're planning to spend $2.3 million into developing plans?
So over the next 2 years, we hope to have multiple plans that are listed in the document completed. One of those documents, actually, if you can go back to that list of, it's the previous one.
They lost control.
There we go. If you don't mind, I can't, this is in front of me. Can you read the list of things? We got the regional active transportation plan,
Absolutely.
the modeling, development and data, microtransit, orthophoto, which gets into a higher level of detail. So all those documents will be accomplished over the next 2 years to help us with our implementation. And all of that has been reviewed by ADOT and FHWA. And we believe it's consistent with what they're doing as well when they complete their plan in November.
Can the subcommittee that is in charge of the carbon reduction program give input if this draft plan is approved today?
Yes, again.
Can it change? Because I see $2.3 million just to develop plans and not to put funds into, let's say, Zawarita needs a safe routes to school for bikes and pedestrians, or putting this money into infrastructure, not just, I get that planning is important. But for the next 2 years, we're going to spend $4.6 million in just planning. I don't see it as a good investment of the funds that we have a very short period to receive funds for. Just the other day, Pima County Environmental Air Quality had to call, it was I mean, and you should know that, you know this, Rex, that it was a day that pollution was very, very high in our community, in the entire region, not just Tucson, in the entire region. And so if we are receiving millions of dollars to improve air quality and to reduce carbon, I would much rather make sure that we're investing this money for air quality, not just planning, but actual tangible benefits to make sure that we're reducing carbon in our region. And so that is why it's important to add more strategy and language to Title VI in environmental justice planning, because that helps lead the vision of what PAG members want to do when it comes to all of these programs that we're receiving federal dollars to precisely do. And so and you're saying on the record that our subcommittee and the PAG can take a look and redo the budgets for the carbon reduction program, correct?
Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, these are the activities that are approved by FHWA and ADOT. The committees can help us lay out the planning effort, the modeling effort, and then the goal is to be able to have a plan in place that can actually track, monitor, and report on the benefits of the program. So throughout
What
the
is
next
the program? The program is planning?
we start with programming, we start with the data collection, mapping, and then develop the plan itself. And then you measure against the plan itself. As the individual elements of the plan are implemented, you can measure against the benefits of implementation of the plan. So it's not just a one shot and done. It's over the life of even our map itself, over the next 20 years. How do we monitor, track, and demonstrate that we are reducing emissions?
Mr. Chair. Well, we just voted unanimously to approve this plan, and the way I see it is programming new carbon reduction funding on eligible regional activities such as all the ones listed. So I think that's what we're going to be doing from that. And we just voted on approving the plan with.
We actually
elements.
voted on the motion to include an
Voted
additional
the
strategy.
plan.
We haven't voted on the plan, but if I may, just so that I can get a clear response from our executive director. If we were to approve the draft OWP, what you have said is that air quality subcommittee meets to give direction, input, advice on the carbon reduction program. If we were to approve this plan, and our air quality subcommittee meets and suggest additional funding for tangible programs, then that is a possibility. That's what I heard before,
As long as.
but I don't know if you're saying yes or no.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, as long as it's consistent with what ADOT and FHW have authorized as programming, yes, within that authorization, we can do that. If not, it's for future years. For future years, we can develop plans and come back and include those for future approval by FHWA and ADOT.
I guess my question continues to be, what is the answer on how we use these funds? Is it just planning, or can these funds be used for safe routes to school, for bike and pedestrian improvements in our jurisdictions? Are these funds available to be allocated by advice from the air quality subcommittee to the PAG, and then can the PAG board make those changes in the near future once we get that input?
Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, if I can put it in a different perspective, a brand new program, we want to build a foundation for the program. And I put out a memo on that a while back. So in order for the program to be successful, we need to develop the foundation for the program. We need to have the data, the mapping, the planning effort. Once all of that is in place, then we can track, monitor, and report on the success of the program. So the first 2 years of the program, those are the things that are identified to be used for those funds. Future years, we can bring new things to the table and go through the approval process in the future.
I do not agree with what you're stating. You're saying that the PAG has no input into how we decide to invest the carbon reduction program funds that we're receiving for this year and the next 3 years?
Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, I'm not clear what you mean by that. Again, my hope is that you all recognize that for any new program, you need to.
I'm not talking about new programs, Mr. Mogimi. I am talking about how the funds are designated and allocated into carbon reduction. And with the RTA, many of the programs that existed, like the Safe Routes to School, like Bike and Pedestrian, like Rideshare, and all of these carbon reductions programs were eliminated. It already existed, they were just defunded. So that's why I'm trying to get to an answer that should be, I think, simple to respond to. Does the subcommittee and does the PAG board have the ability to give direction on how to allocate funds that are coming to our region?
Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, again, if I understand the question, that's what we're having this conversation for. This body has the ultimate authority to authorize what we're going to do, and this body's ultimately going to provide the direction. So I'm looking for direction from the body.
Just to follow in this line of questioning, I'm looking at page 18 of the draft overall work plan. And it says the purpose of the carbon reduction program is to reduce transportation emissions through the development of state carbon reduction strategies and by funding initiatives designed to reduce transportation emissions. The CRP is a new program authorized by the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Now, Mr. Mogimi, you mentioned that we are engaged in foundational work right now. You also mentioned that the work is done by a number of PAG committees. You cited one of them in response to the mayor's question. I think another committee that's working on this, correct me if I'm wrong, is the Transportation Planning Committee. Could we get an overview? Could the Regional Council get an overview of what each committee is responsible for, what work has been done so far, separate from what's described here? Could we get an overview of the work that's already been done and the work that's going to be done, and which PAG committee is going to be doing that work? I think that would go a long way towards getting some of the details that the mayor's requesting, and I'm sure the rest of the Regional Council would be interested in it as well.
Mr. Chair, Supervisor Scott, if you recall, we had this conversation at the last Regional Council meeting as well. We are working with ADOT. ADOT has only had one meeting on this topic. The due date is in November. As soon as we have more information from ADOT, we can engage our committees. And we've communicated that to all the committees that we need to have that information from ADOT before we can engage them. Otherwise, we're not aligned with ADOT's program. Once we have that information, they have the ultimate authority over that document, then we need to engage our committees to align with the state program. I think where we are currently is aligned. If we need to make adjustments, we can make adjustments after that study is done in November. And we'll do that with all the committees, not just one committee, but the only committee that really comes in mind right now is the Air Quality Subcommittee. I think that would be a good activity for that group. But they can send the recommendations to any other committee that's relevant to the recommendation for additional feedback.
Now, I appreciate the reference back to the previous meeting, and I realize that we're at the ground floor of this work. I think as we get more information from ADOT, getting more information to the regional council on the work of the various committees it is going to be most helpful.
Be happy to. Again, we'll have a presentation to the regional council once that study is completed by ADOT.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, appreciate it. Fully support the idea we need to be in alignment. You know, if we're doing one-offs everywhere, it's not going to have the overall impact. We need everybody working in the same direction if we're going to make impact on this. I guess just for clarification, because we're getting a lot into the specifics of it. The dollars are new dollars.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you, IJ did a lot of new dollars and they all came with strings. They just did. And for what we had control over, that was very little. So my question, I guess, Executive, because may clarify some of this is carbon reduction funding, I'm going to assume came with, as it says on this statement, eligible regional activities. It's not something we can do whatever we want, but it has to fit in certain eligible regional activities, which if you look at the 2023 to 2024 breakdowns, you see very specific to include new procurement on some, which I'm going to assume are new programs. So to your point, there is more to come and there's more to lose. And we just got to remember sometimes when we see dollars go into a certain funding event, it may have already been decided at the federal level on how we're going to expend this. But again, you're right on the November due date for ADOT.
And if I may add to that, Mr. Chair, Mr. Maxwell. So like I said, ADOT has only had one meeting on this topic. They hope to meet over the next 3 months. We'll have more information. We'll present to you as we get more information, but we are confident that what we have in our list currently is eligible. And you're right, there are things that are not eligible that are being brought to the table, and we'll make sure we identify those as well.
I wanted to make a motion if we could. I think the program's pretty good. I think we get too far into the weeds. There could be adjustments on these things as we go along, but I think we need to approve the program in order for us to move forward. So I'd like to make a motion that the PAG overall work program for fiscal year 24-25 be approved.
I'll second that.
I'd like to ask for a friendly amendment.
Mr. Chair, if I may, before we do that, so there's a little bit more involved in the approval. I'll come back after that if you don't mind.
I just think I think that there should be discussion. And so if there is a motion and a second, there should be discussion and there should be a friendly amendment to reflect that PAG through its committee and subcommittee process can add to the scope, especially of the budget, because if you notice on the draft plan and page 19, after what Supervisor Scott read, that the carbon reduction program did come with strings attached. It's very specific in terms of the eligibility of programs, planning, and other activities that are broad in scope. And part of the goals for the carbon reduction program is to reduce auto emissions by providing a commuter assistance rideshare program and promoting alternative transportation to employers and commuters, shifting transportation demand to non-peak hours and transportation modes, increasing vehicle occupancy rates and otherwise reducing demand for roads. Goal 22 very specifically says, develop multimodal components of the long-range RMAP, including the construction, planning, and design of on-road and off-road facilities for pedestrians, bicyclists, and other non-motorized forms of transportation. So the reason that I am wanting to discuss, as we should, as a planning organization of this region, we should be talking about how are we going to use pretty hefty money for the future and the benefit of why these funds are coming to our region. And so I'd like to make sure that if we do approve this draft plan, that we have the capacity to have our subcommittees and this board make decisions with the funds that are coming in that are designated not just for planning, but the goals as stated to make sure that we're building infrastructure and assisting programs, rideshare programs that we already had in this organization.
Any further discussion? None, so there's a motion.
Mr. Chair, if I may, there's a little bit more details required in the motion. There's a suggested motion on the slide, and the reason for that is that we have to make sure that we sign additional contracts from the funding partners coming in. So that's authorizing us to do that as well. So if you don't mind the suggested motion,
I would add that verbiage.
the suggested motion is on the screen. If you don't mind, that's the
I
suggested
can't
motion.
read it.
Okay. And the second,
I will agree with the second.
thank you.
All in favor?
What? There was a friendly amendment that asked that we have the flexibility to review the budget as we move forward for 24-25 and as moving forward to make sure that we have the flexibility to use these funds and have conversations about how these funds are used into the future. So is the motion maker open to that flexibility?
With all due respect, Mayor Romero, I am not. I think that the overall program covers all of that. And we've discussed how once they're in the program, we can come back. I think if we get too far in the weeds, that we have to do this and we have to do that, starts tying our hands before we even get the money. And I would just ask for a vote without the
Right.
amendment.
Well, point of order, Thomas, I think we had a motion and a second and we voted.
Right. So, Mr. Chairman, that motion stands, but it doesn't mean that if you didn't want to take more action, you could, because it's on the agenda for action. So if you need another motion or you want more action, you could do that, but the motion's already, the one motion, you can't amend it now.
Did we get a pass on?
I thought we just I thought Mayor Honey said he just agreed to re-amend his motion to what's written on.
Add the
chart.
verbiage
And
that
he-
we're
and he had
required to.
So I tend to agree with you on this thought of Mayor Honey, because I understand, Mayor Romero, what you're trying to ensure. And I think that's already embedded in our processes inside of PAG or inside of PAG and RTA. There's also about $2 million not allocated is funded under our carbon reduction plan. So when you add up the numbers, there's still $2 million available that is yet to be determined from total expense. We had carryovers from the first year. So when I did the quick math, there was still more carryover from year to year in 23 and 24. And I guess my one question is, OWP comes up every year. Best I can tell so far.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Maxwell, ADOT changed it to every 2 years. So this is for 24 and 25. But we can come back as many times. We can come back as many times as needed to have this conversation.
Thank you, Director. That's the other point, is we can always bring this up, this topic back up. I do think there's funding there. I think our system's set that if we're not using our committees that way, then we're fundamentally doing something wrong in our structure as well. So, and biggest thing is, I don't want to give the authority of the board away to the committees to make changes to the budget. Budget's got to come back, and the committees can and should recommend to us changes they want to make to the budget, and then we have the conversation.
Well, that's obvious. Everything should come to us, especially when it comes to budgeting. But I've said enough.
I'll go to you, Mayor.
There was a point of order. So there was a motion, there was a second, there was a vote. What I understood is that was tied specifically to goal 3 to add additional strategy. Now, maybe I misunderstood.
No,
The clarification is
It was two
Mr. Chair, I think
votes.
there've been two motions passed on this. One was about the language with respect to the environmental justice
Right.
element, and then there was
We all voted for
this
it.
particular suggested motion was
Well,
also passed.
I don't believe there's been a vote on
No,
this.
Mr. Chair, you're-
There's been a motion, there's been a second. Mayor Romero asked for a friendly amendment, that was denied. And that's where I believe we're at with this.
I think we took a vote. If Mr.
I don't think
Chairman,
we took a vote.
But I don't know if we got who
Unless-
voted how.
Other than that, I asked, I did ask for a second, all in favor, and then mayor interjected. So that's where we're at, in my opinion. And then after that, that was for that one. The second one was
Oh, I think there was a vote.
the next vote was to approve the ability to receive the funds. I think they said.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, with all due respect, I don't think we took a vote on the second motion that was still being discussed. I suggested to the mayor to use the suggested motion on the screen, and that's where you stand right now. You have that motion and a second for that motion.
Mr. Mogimi, during our pre-meeting, you mentioned that the language for the suggested motion was crafted the way that it was, partly because of what's going on in Washington right now with regard to the debt limit issue. Could you comment on that for the remainder of the board?
Thank you for bringing that up. So as you all know, there's a lot of debate going on at the federal level right now related to the debt limit and the potential action or non-action by Congress. We have been alerted by our partners at the federal agencies as well as state agencies to be prepared for a worst case scenario. And therefore, not only for this action, for any other action in the future, we have to mitigate for any potential reductions in federal funds. So there's a small risk, but had there been a larger risk, I would have recommended an amended agenda to discuss that further. But at this point, we just have to wait and see.
Thank you. So, for a clarification for me. I think the first one we didn't vote. There were first and second discussion. And now we go to all in favor of that first one.
My motion.
Your motion and his.
Yeah.
You guys made the first motion, like
The one on
that,
the screen.
and the second.
The one on the screen, the one we're voting on is the one on the screen.
To the overall.
Yes, yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Nays.
Hey,
Then the second with your,
So the second one, Mr. Chair, I believe there was a vote taken on the revision to the Title VI language. I believe there was a vote on that, and yes, we will make that change. I don't believe there's any more action required.
And then just as a clarification, we will, after you get the additional information from ADOT, that's when we'll get the report on the work of the various committees with regard to the carbon reduction program.
Yes, sir. That'll be in November.
Thank you.
okay, so on to 8 or further discussion on 7. Just to let everybody know, as a tribe, we always have to figure out if it's an allowable or not before we even start planning or anything else. So, but it's good that we have information, maybe even a little bit more on these, so regional council can have an idea of the vision and the purpose. So then that we move on to number 8, Mr. Linda.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Regional Council. We are at the state level, state legislature, about 137 days in from the start. A lot of the uncertainty has been resolved, of course, with the budget, so I'll keep my remarks brief. Okay, so since the beginning, as of today, it looks like we've had about 1,600 bills, almost 1,700 posted. 255 have passed both chambers, 72 vetoed, I believe that is a record, and 151 signed. The Arizona legislature did pass a budget, as you know, for fiscal year 2024 a couple weeks ago, amounting to around $17.8 billion. thanks to strong revenues above and beyond what is necessary to maintain existing state operations. The state has a fiscal year that runs from July 1st until June 30th, and throughout the last few weeks, leadership in each chamber and the legislature have met with the governor to negotiate revenue expectations and expense priorities for the upcoming fiscal year. The budget outlines a spending plan for fiscal year 2024 that includes one-time spending and revenue changes. Some of the more notable adjustments include one-time funding for education, reallocation of results-based funding for an ongoing increase in K-12 funding, individual income tax rebate, capital and transportation infrastructure investments, and a significant number of smaller one-time appropriations. Total transportation-related projects total about $650 million. Capital outlays found in 1722 show that some of the projects of interest to our area include $89 million for the I-10 widening from Casa Grande to Chandler, $10 million for I-10 Cotaro traffic interchange, $15 million for the Drexel Road Bridge improvements, $3.5 million for a Phoenix to Tucson passenger rail study, and $3.2 million for State Route 77 pavement rehabilitation, which apparently was an adjustment from the appropriation last year. The legislature has recessed until June 12th, at which time they'll return to pass some remaining bills. Among them will likely be an extension of Prop 400, transportation excise tax in Maricopa County, set to expire after 2025. Prop 400 generated $665 million last year alone. Loss of this revenue could strain other state revenue sources distributed throughout Arizona should an agreement not be reached. Now turning to some of the bills that we have been watching, this list has gotten smaller since several of them have been changed or have died, including some listed on the screen. 1312 would establish prohibitions on considering vehicle miles travel in transportation or land use planning, reporting a person vehicle miles of travel in several different ways, and imposing a fee or tax based on VMT. This bill did pass out of the Senate and out of the Transportation and Infrastructure House Committee. It was retained on the House Committee of the Whole calendar. So this would, no one's talking about advancing a VMT tax. This would just cut us off from really even having that conversation. 1313 would prohibit a general plan from including policies or projects that reduce overall system capacity for motor vehicle traffic and modifies or required elements of a general plan. Called this the General Plan Complete Streets Ban. I don't know if that's fully true, but this one, although it passed out of the Senate, did fail in the House and is now gone. 1340 would prohibit a county board of supervisors from granting an application to construct a toll road if the proposed toll road will be converted from a publicly funded or maintained street or highway. It would also prohibit ADOT from entering into a public-private partnership agreement that allows the conversion of the existing publicly funded or maintained street or highway to a toll road, including conversion to implement a traffic management strategy. This bill was signed into law. 1697 would prohibit ADOT from accepting federal monies to pay for the construction, maintenance, expansion of the highway or a state route if the acceptance of federal monies is conditioned on the design and construction of a bicycle path and pedestrian walkway component of a highway or state route. That one did fail on the Senate floor. And lastly, Senate Concurrent Resolution 1018. This would put on the 2024 general election a ballot item to ban any potential vehicle miles traveled tax. This did pass out of the Senate and out of the House committees. I don't think it's met the House floor quite yet. That does conclude my report, unless you have any questions.
Any questions? Thank you. Move on to the next item.
Mr. Chair, Jeanette, going to give us an update on the activities associated with the long-range plan, and feel free to add anything that you believe would benefit the conversation as well, if I missed anything previously.
Thank you, Farhad. Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Council, my name is Jeanette Duran, Transportation Planning Director here at PAG. Good to see you all again. I'm here to talk about our long-range plan. the RMAP, Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan. Just for orientation, the RMAP is our federally required long-range plan, and it's updated every 4 years. It's intended to meet the federal requirements for long-range transportation planning. A main element of the plan is to include reasonable assumptions on future growth and development. And the plan strives to ensure that our investments are responsive to the future needs of the region. This board last approved our long-range plan in September of 2020. Seems like the time has gone by really quickly. The RMAP is a performance-based plan, and the performance-based aspect of our long-range plan started back in the 2016 plan. In the 2020 approved plan, we took a look at those performance measures and provided a performance report for the first time. We'll continue to do that again in the next plan. The last RMAP was a fiscally constrained document. So what that means is that all of our projects that are in the long range plan have to meet a reasonable expectation for funding. It was constrained at $15.1 billion. It's also important to remember that projects that are programmed in the TIP have to be presented in the long range plan. So part of the process is to make sure that our projects that are in design or set for construction in the TIP are also reflected in that plan. We've already begun development of what we're going to be calling the 2055 long range plan. And that started, I would say it started before we even approved the last one. So it's a continuous process. We're always updating our data and improving our methods. Back for the 2016 plan and then refined for the 2020 plan, staff created the RMAP Project Explorer tool to house our data and our project details. That includes our project costs, the scopes, the location, and our performance data. And the interesting thing that came of that, it was the foundation for what became the RTA Next project tool. So when we do a project or plan, as you've seen in the OWP, we try to make those tools applicable to all of our planning efforts. So make the best use of the resources that we have. Currently, we're updating that tool with the latest data sets and making sure that it's user-friendly for our jurisdiction partners that will be going in there and using that tool. So other projects that have already begun that we're already working on are updates to our demographic data, such as our population and employment projections. That has already started to go through the committee process, and you see that on today's agenda. I believe it's the next agenda item. That information is incorporated into updates to our land use model and our activity-based model. We have already opened the project portal, the Explorer tool, to our jurisdiction. So our partners have gone in and begun updating projects that they want to keep in the in-plan list, and also to remove projects that are no longer priorities. Later this summer, we intend on opening that portal up again for our jurisdiction partners to go in and add new projects. We've also acquired a survey tool and are developing a survey, and we have put together a full deployment plan for that. And we do anticipate a strong participation rate. Probably conduct that later on this year. Development of our revenue projections, obviously a big key component of our long range plan, has begun at the end of last year. Well, the second half of last year, we brought forth some new methodology to our TPC committee on how we might take a look at our revenue projections. We also worked with our jurisdiction partners on developing realistic expectations for local fund spending on our regional projects. Of course, the long range plan is coordinating with the RTA Next effort. RTA does play a big role in our transportation planning for the future, and the results of the voter approved initiative should be reflected in that plan when that time comes. Also, a major component of that process is the cost estimation. And so all those new cost estimates will go into the projects in the long range plan, just so that we have the best and most relevant information in there. That's all I have at this point. As I said, it's a continuous process. We're always working on it, and happy to take any questions that you might have.
Any questions?
We get something sent to the regional council that perhaps the outline that you were reading from Jeanette, touching on the 5 bulleted items.
Yes, of course.
That would be most helpful. I mean, you went through a lot of information, but if the regional council could get a copy of that presentation, and the details under each one of the 5 bulleted items.
Yeah.
That would be very helpful.
Mr. Chair, Supervisor Scott, I'd be happy to do that. One of the reasons we want to give you this update was because of the next item on the agenda that's related to it, but be happy to give you more information.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Next item.
All right, Mr. Chair, so as I mentioned, this item directly is related to our planning effort for the long-range plan and basically any other studies or documents that are done throughout the county relies on this information. And this information is typically starts from the state. We take the information from the state on population projections. And then through our committee process with very complicated math, I've tried, and our team members here can explain to you a little bit more. It's a very extensive process to be able to come back and develop what we call a sub-county projection. So in your packet, there's a list of every community and what the projected population growth is through 2060. And that has gone through the committee process and recommended by the committee for approval. And again, Dr. Noel is here to answer any mathematical questions you have about how we arrived at those numbers. But other than that, if you have any questions, this is the action item. This information will be utilized. It will be updated frequently. So it's not just one and done. But again, absent of the, having any other mechanism to explain the details to you, I'm going to rely on Dr. Noah to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Chair, just one quick question. The recent census, and I know it changes every year after the 10 years, especially for fast growing communities. How much does this ever growing census tract weigh in on coming up with these figures? Because locally, we're disagreeing a little with the state from a number count because it affects our state shared revenue on where we think we are as a community growth and where they think we are as a community. So if you could just touch on how the census plays into your calculations.
Thank you, and Mr. Chair and the regional council members. Yeah, census data is actually just the background. The background of this all just the population estimates and the projection. So AOE, Regional Office of Economic Opportunity, developed just the product based on this census 2020 product. But additionally, just if there's any kind of just the issues, we thought that it might be not right, then we just have. One of the examples, the census CQR and the South Tucson, actually just the 1,000 population dropped compared to the other. So we have and those portions, but actually these numbers here you see that population projections at 20 level is based on the 2020 census data.
Okay. I was a little worried about that. That's okay.
Are the population projections based on current jurisdictional boundaries?
It's based on the 2022 jurisdictional boundary because of the count estimates actually just based on just the annually and the updated, but this county projection and the sub-county projection, second, fifth, eighth year of just the decade. So second and this year 2023, and they're based on the 2022 county population projection actually developed. Then based on that, the county population projection, using that as just our control total, we developed the sub-county population projection. So we use 2022 and jurisdiction boundary.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. It's not related to Tucson, actually. Can you explain to us why South Tucson numbers stay the same throughout the years?
Yeah, that's the issue in the 2010 census, and which is a little higher. Well, it's 1,000 more higher. That's because of a 2022, I'm sorry, this is 2020 census, as you know, we are in the middle of just COVID-19. So there was some issue and actually just we think there are some just undercounted numbers. So for that reason, just we discussed there was just our sub-county, I'm sorry, just a subcommittee. And then we decide to just keep it as just is in the 2022 number. Then just we also preparing some sort of just analysis, census CQR, count question resolution, challenging the census.
So it could possibly change this number because it has the 4,599 people in 22, 25, 30, 35, all the way down to 2060.
For 2020 census number won't change,
Okay.
but the actual just the product and the ongoing would be just updated based on the result to CQR.
Okay.
And about this and the effort, as mentioned, the second, fifth, eighth year of a decade we developed. So there's a chance and in this decade, 2 more chances in this decade. So that should be just considered in the next round in the population projection.
So the number can change.
Yes.
Okay. Because that's the only number, the city of South Tucson number is the only one that doesn't
static.
change, that's static.
That's right. And plus just the Oro Valley, and the Oro Valley has just the county, Oro Valley itself just capacity issue and no more just the lands to be developed more than allocated here. So that's another kind of just caveat and I can add.
Yes, sir.
Now, that's why I asked about jurisdictional boundaries.
Yes.
It's assumed that it's not going to change, but obviously as we do updates in the future, those changes are reflected in the future updates.
Because I read this as projections.
Correct.
Not in
Mhm.
concrete, not to never be
Right.
changed, you
Correct.
know, those types of things. Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion, the regional council approve the sub-county population projections 2023 through 2060.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Thank you. Next item.
All right, Mr. Chair, this next item is somewhat unique. I believe some of you have gone through this before. At the request of the State Department of Economic Security, PAG, as a council of governments, not as a planning organization, but as a council of governments, we provide an opportunity to review these federal social service grants, block funds, and make recommendations to the state. The state makes the final decision. We are simply a mechanism to provide input, and the input is in your packet based on the committee's recommendation. The committee's ad hoc committee, they get together for this purpose only. And the recommendation is just based on allocation for individual category of services. The state makes the final decision. So with that, I believe Janine is online as well, but be happy to answer any questions you have. If not, I recommend that you would acknowledge and approve the committee's allocations.
Any questions or discussion?
We talked about this when we had our pre-meeting meeting. Who are the members of the PAG Social Services Planning Subcommittee?
I'm going to ask Janine to help answer that question. She puts out a call, and typically it's mostly social services organizations, but Janine, please go ahead and respond to the question.
Sure. Thank you, Farhad. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Regional Council. I'm Janine Sullivan. I serve as the Transportation Mobility Coordinator here at PAG. And so to help answer your question regarding the Social Services Block Grant Committee subcommittee members, essentially we extended invitations out to over 25 agencies, and those agencies were derived of those that are most closely aligned with the funding and service intents that are outlined in this state fiscal year 2024 social services block grant. And so some examples of those types of organizations or agencies would be like Pima Council on Aging, the United Way, Child Care Resource and Referral, Easter Seals Blake Foundation, and of course, Tohono O'odham Nation, Pascua Yaqui Tribe, interfaith community services, et cetera. So there's quite an extensive list. And of those, we had several agencies participate in the different subcommittee meetings. And then they were also extended opportunity to provide additional comments or feedback beyond the meetings through the submission of fact sheets.
Mr. Chair, could we look in the future at having jurisdictional representation on this planning subcommittee?
Yeah, of course, we can do that. Again, this was mainly at the request of the state to involve social services organizations, but we can extend it to jurisdictions as well.
I would appreciate that because I think all of us within our governments have departments that work with the various social service organizations, and you could provide some valued input and perhaps even suggest other organizations that aren't currently involved.
Be happy to.
Any further questions or discussion? Not to have a motion from.
Motion to approve as outlined as opposed to me reading that whole thing.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes. Wow.
Here, item 12 is mostly at your pleasure. As you recall, we've had a couple conversations, and I believe Mr. Maxwell, Supervisor Scott, and Mayor Murphy were involved in the draft that you have in your packet. So I'll open it up to them for any comments.
Mr. Chair, as we've talked a lot over the last year and almost a year and a half now on establishing a 360 type executive director performance assessment. We've gone through a lot of discussions, a lot of things. Essentially, I put together this as the proposal. I took a lot of insight and guidance on this from different 360 reviews or performance director reviews that were being used at multiple other MPOs and such, to include El Paso, Colorado Springs, and a handful of others. And also from some that were for organizations outside of the MPO structure, and just getting the nature of the 360 review. Once I had it in its draft, first original draft form that I did, provide that to Supervisor Scott and Mayor Murphy for their input and assessment on any changes they would like to recommend before we brought it forward to the battle. I want to be very clear, this was not a committee of any sort. It wasn't a board assess things. This was something that I almost a year and a half ago committed to getting this eventually. Would have liked to have done it in a lot faster manner to you all, but we eventually got into a format that I think it's ready for approval and to be moved forward. You know, after we approve the general concept of this 360, I'd like to continue the discussion on to both who the 360 would be distributed to, as well as establishing how we would collect those. And I've got some ideas, but I think it's important that the board has the discussion, or at the regional council has discussion on how to do it properly, and then the timing and how to get that information back to us. And to the executive director. Remember, this is not purely a performance review issue. This is something that is used to establish goals, objectives, and provide feedback to the performance, specifically to both the executive director and us as a group. So at this time, I'd like to just ask Supervisor Scott or Mayor Murphy if they've got any comments they want to make on the actual proposal. Just realize in here, there's one that comes to us as supervisors. There's one for the executive director himself. There's one for his direct reports or for those who work for him. Right now, I think we're leaning towards establish them as his direct reports, and then one for his peers, which at this point we've discussed city and town managers.
Did you want, Mr. Chair, did you want comments just specifically on the document itself right now, and then we can go
Mayor
into
Murphy,
the
I would
others?
never limit what you could comment.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I know, first, I appreciate a lot of hard work went into the original document, and then you were very open to both Supervisor Scott and myself for making, I would probably think, sort of small changes, but important changes to us. So I appreciate all the efforts and a lot of time has been put into these few pages. So I'm certainly comfortable with the document itself. We know we've had discussions on who it should go to. We just did a 360 of sorts with our town manager, who's sitting right over there. And as typical, we, our council, that's who he works for, our council, just like Mr. McGee, works for all of us. And then he did actually, in kudos, he did it on his own, went to the subordinates and said, I want the feedback on there. So those are the two areas I'm very comfortable with. Knowing that the executive director is, other than working with all of us, has the fiduciary responsibility, oversight of various contracts. The only one I'm at this point not comfortable with is the various other town managers. On one hand, I work very closely with my town manager. So with the TMC and, every time there's a meeting, I go to him, how are things going? How is it working with staff? So I feel like I have all that information I need from there. And then, words like exclusiveness and inequity get thrown around a lot, but no other town manager. And we also have various entities that are here. Some don't have a town manager. Some have an interim town manager. ADOT doesn't have a town manager, but from there. So, and I'm not aware of any other town manager that when we do their review, Mr. Mogimi is involved with that. So that would be my only exception, is in the guise of fairness and equity to have it us and then the subordinates. And I obviously, when I do a town manager, I reach out to our chamber and to all the various stakeholder organizations. So I just feel I'm very capable to find out from people within our area who has feedback that would be important.
And Mr. Chair and Mayor Murphy, to your comment about the peers, that is truly up to the board to decide where we want to do it.
Right.
To make it a full inclusive 360, the role of the peers is also there. I mean, a lot of it's just informational, and it's what we do with the information, how we perceive the information, get it. And to your point, for your town manager, you did go to some peers, you went to the chambers and to others. And so there are different ways to do it. I think one of the things we were trying to do to be fair to, especially on this initial attempt at this, to the executive director, is not to make it too broad or too outwards. And we know that there's going to be things, there was recommendations to bring it to chairs of committees, to lower levels of employees, to former employees, to other folks. And I think especially in this first period, that would be excessive. But I do believe that there's benefit in getting some of those words from your town manager. And I would certainly hope the mayors and the town managers could be kind of in sync, but you just never know. And it's a different relationship. But again, it's what we do with it. Not, this is not a grade of A, B, C, or D. It's not an up, down. It's where we go and we use it in establishing goals and objectives for the future. But ultimately, who gets this report is really predominantly for feedback for the executive director himself, and then for us in establishing the goals and assessments. Right. So that's, like I said, it's open for discussion.
Right.
And I appreciate your help and support on this.
My last uncomfortableness part of it is when a contract is being fouled, once it's been approved by the RTA, if there's something out of line that has to be reported to the attorney general or whoever it is, that would be potentially the staff member that could potentially be giving the feedback. So because of that unique fiduciary responsibility, it's sort of like if we were doing a feedback session on our police officers, I probably wouldn't be going to the people that were issued a ticket for feedback on how our officer did. But that's just where I am. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank General Maxwell for the foundational work that he did in providing a draft to Mayor Murphy and myself to comment on. I want to thank Mayor Murphy because what he came up with regards to the ratings that you see right there, exceeds, meets, needs improvement with a middle ground in between exceeds and meets, and between meets and needs. I think that helped us to move forward when we were spending a lot of time talking about that particular component. As somebody who has used employee evaluation documents in 3 different school districts, what I have always felt is that the most important component of any evaluation document is the narrative component. And so I'm hopeful that everybody who completes this document will worry less about which oval they're filling in terms of the ratings, and worry a lot more about the narrative feedback that they're providing to us as a council, and ultimately to Mr. Mogimi, because I think it's that narrative feedback that is going to be most important to us in terms of hearing what all these different groups have to say about the assessment of Mr. Mogimi's performance. It's going to be most constructive to him in terms of his reflections on the document. I'd also encourage Mr. Mogimi, when it comes to the self-evaluation portion, to focus more on the narrative component than any other piece. I do think, as a metropolitan planning organization, a council of governments, all of us except for General Maxwell represent different jurisdictions. And the employees within those jurisdictions, notably our managers and administrators, work closely with Mr. Mogimi and his staff. So I think this peer component is absolutely vital in terms of providing us with the comprehensive feedback that we're looking for, and also in terms of providing Mr. Mogimi with the kind of feedback that can help him to be reflective as well. So I'm very comfortable with the document as drafted. Really enjoyed the opportunity to work with my 2 colleagues on this, and hope that we will approve it in its total form.
Any other comments? I'll maybe first.
Mayor, I want to just clarify, I'm good with what we have in front of us in terms of the draft assessment, performance assessment. What I see is that it's for RTA board directors, senior management, and then peers. That is something that I think we've talked about before, and I agree. It's not quite a 360 because usually 360 evaluations give the opportunity for community to give input. So we should not call it a 360 if it's not going to be a 360. It is an assessment. And so usually 360s, we've done one for our city manager, we actually included one for labor groups and community partners to give us input and an assessment of how our city manager was doing. And so being able to open it up as a true 360 approach, to extend it to, we send one to the Tucson Chamber, we send one to the Southern Arizona Leadership Council, we sent one to, I don't remember, and it was managed. The entire project was managed by a person that didn't report directly to the city manager. It was managed by an appointee. So whomever is going to manage receiving all this input should be someone that does not report to the executive director of this organization. So I think we need to talk a little bit about who you're all thinking should manage receiving all of this input and then distilling the input for the board to be able to look at the responses. Because I agree with Supervisor Rex that the comments say a lot. And so is it a 360? Will we include other community partners in this feedback assessment form, or is it just an assessment? And if it's just an assessment, then we should not call it a 360.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, respectfully, it is a 360 if we include the community peers. If we include the town managers, it is, because we've got the folks on a similar level. We've got those above and beyond. What you're talking about is the breadth and the depth. So what you chose to do in the city of Tucson, you went with a very
Broad.
wide breadth of a 360. You took it to expand it. The military, I'll tell you, we did it really quickly. It was the depth was 2 up and down, and peers were all within the same organization and same entity. So it was only 2 levels deep, and it was a single entity or organization wide, still different, units inside that organization. Now, as a wing, we could have gone through all the commanders in the wing and all the members of the military. We could have done that, but chose not to for the purpose of what we're trying to get at. So if we eliminate the peers, you're right, it's not a 360, it's purely a performance assessment. But what we do, in this year doesn't have to be what we do next year or 3 years from now or 5 years. We can always expand and go on. And I do believe when we're introducing something new, sometimes it's good to take some baby steps, but it's at the pleasure of the regional council.
Well, in that case, I would prefer, if that is the option, then I would prefer to have the peers be able to give us their input.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
General Maxwell, your ad hoc committee, was there discussion about how it will be administered? Mayor Romero made reference.
Again, because we were just looking predominantly on the development and creation of this, that's where the conversation stayed. So we as a group, you can already tell Mayor Murphy's got a different idea than I do. We really, for when it comes to how this is incorporated, in other words, who all receives it, what I laid out on these 3 different samples, I gave an option so that we could go in any of those directions, community, the peers, those above and those below. But that is really at the board. The discussion we had was really just clarifying and making this, and you heard kind of both of them allude to some of the significant changes. One was the addition of the in-betweens on some of the categories of your rating. And then we chose not to do it with number system. That was another conversation. Yeah. And then obviously Supervisor Scott believes very deeply in the comment space, the verbal part, because that's when you get into some of the specifics, which might glean just a little hope. But we did not discuss, or we do not have a recommendation. That was something that I was hoping we'd follow up with. Once we approve this, after that today, try to establish who, timeline, and how we want to do it. To the point of, there are companies that will administer these, but they come with a cost. And that's one way to ensure that there's nobody involved in the system to get into it. I personally thought that and that's one of the reasons I asked the question about the organizational chart, because the PAG regional the council, remember the council can also, our advisor, could also be a trusted source who could consolidate the data and then distribute it to those who are necessary. But that is something we would really need to decide how we want to go forward with this. The only suggestion I have is that I would like to see it be a priority of this organization. We've been waiting for this to hold off on the executive director performance review, and that is really where he gets feedback from us on goals, expectations, and everything like that. It's really unfair to him not to provide that. Although, sometimes it'd be great if my bosses never told me what I had.
So for our town manager, when we do an assessment evaluation, all the materials comes through the council's attorney, so that there's council, right? And then so then we meet. We haven't necessarily filled out an evaluation form, but then we meet in executive session, and then that's when that evaluation process, when we provide that feedback. I guess what I would feel most comfortable with is that it went through an attorney, was distributed by an attorney to these various groups. That information came back to the attorney, and then we, as a board, meet in executive session and we could all have that in advance, again, through the attorney, but I think it is important that there be some protection.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Winfield, 100% agree with your recommendation on that one, because that's how I would like to see it done, is through the attorney, and then as with all of our performance reviews, we accomplish them in executive session. That's how we should.
100% agree. Also, I think we gave the opportunity for those assessing to remain, for it not to be connected to their name. So especially those that serve for the senior management team. But I think everyone could have I mean, I'm fine, being able to use my name because I'm on the board of director and I don't respond to the executive director, but very specifically senior management and peers, there has to be some sort of, protection for them so that there's no retaliation.
And Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, that's exactly how it's supposed to work. There is no names on it. There's one story on a 360 where I had somebody come in and complain to me that one of their supervisors gave them had to be, because there was only one response, and they wanted me to address that with their supervisor. Well, it turned out it was mine. I was the one that felt bad because I was on one of the recommended supervisors, and we sat and talked about why. And after it was all done, it was really a strong opportunity to make progress, because now the response to the individual was directly from the person that made it. So they were able to sort it out. But the way it's supposed to be done is it's compilation, and other than the remarks, because we've added the remark section where you can have some remarks, and what we see is just the total overall average. We don't see the individual numbers that whoever it is that's responsible for putting together says, here's how the supervisors, here's how the council rated, overall council ratings averaged out. Here's the peer ratings averaged out. Here's the subordinate ratings averaged out. And then here's a list of specifics of things we can work on. But that's how it's intended to run. And that's why if you take it really broad and really deep on the breadth or on the depth, it's now you're talking 30, 40, 50 people providing input. It's just an average. And one of the most impactful things is when you're being able to measure the individuals who's going through the 360. I've been on all three ends of these things before. When you see how you think you are compared to where everybody else thinks you are, and generally you'll find the peers, the subordinates, and the leadership don't agree. There is differences there, and you can see where maybe you're doing a great job communicating, where you can use a little bit more communication.
Mr. Chair, I guess I'd want Thomas's thoughts on, because I agree with the protection and the attorney, but I know it's a close working relationship. Is there a preference that we do feel better finding somebody that?
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, I'm more than happy to do it. I don't see any problem with it whatsoever.
Right. So any conflicts or any uncomfortableness and have you worked on something similar to this in the past? And
yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the council, yes, I have.
Any other comments?
Do you need a motion? Anyone?
I want to make a comment for the motion. It seems that, we get to this time, whether you're here, or the government, or a civic setting. But I want to remind everybody, this is a tool that is meant to figure out if we need to set some standards and ask whoever we're evaluating. And go in there with at least an attitude to give it a fair chance. That's doing more than 45 years of evaluations, and dealing with people with all kinds of circumstances. And I look at these, being on this regional council, is, how from the top to the bottom and everything here works, and is it really doing good at serving all our communities? Every boat needs a captain of the ship, but it's all the work people that do all the engine work and all the other stuff. So when I look at these, that's what I used to do for a lot of businesses and places that I worked, and even being the gentleman that worried about everything there. I had more than maybe 1,200 to 3,000 employees at any given time. And it all, the buck stops here at the top. Somebody has to sign, you know, the performance evaluations and their rate of pay and everything else. So I'm thankful that you guys asked me to include it in today's agenda. Some of you have called me and told me we need to deal with this. And we do need to deal. A year and a half is a long time. And you know, our terms here are short compared to what PAG has become and how it serves. And some other day, other people from the tribe will sit here, other people from the cities will sit here. And if we start setting these standards now, maybe it is time, like we all discussed, to change a little bit of that. But I ask of you to use your heart and your mind to try and look at what we have and how to even enhance it as PAG. So in this tool, I agree with the way it's done. The answering part, well, you guys figured it out. And then the question for me becomes to everybody, is it now time to say this is fine and take a consensus vote? That's all we need, right? We don't need and if everybody's okay, then we move forward with this and then implement the start of the whole thing, and however the regional council wants to send it out. And I'm sure that, you know, I don't know who's gonna do that. That's my thing. How do we get those bodies that everybody's asking about at certain levels to build one of these out and work on these and do that? So.
And Mr. Chair, to your point too about making them fill out, we can't force anybody to fill any of this out. So it's, and quite often when you send out 30, you may get 20, 15 back. I mean, really surveys are even generally lower than that. So it's to your point. What I have heard so far is it sounds the only thing beyond potentially using this. I think we've got an agreement from the Benavides to be the executor and the keeper of the data and the compiler of the data. And I think that they kind of sound like everybody's leaning in that direction. The only thing that we probably have left to do is discuss who, if it goes to the peers or not. That's the only thing that I see us in still having a further conversation.
So is everybody okay then? Are we go on and move forward on this?
I think that we have to be very explicit in terms of, and I don't know if we need a motion for direction, but I think we need to be explicit about having the actual 360, making sure that it is board, PAG Regional Council and board RTA Board of Directors, that it is inclusive of the senior management team, and that it is also inclusive of the peers and of course the self-evaluation.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'd make a motion so that we just clarify it. I would move to do basically as General Maxwell explained it, members of the board, peers, and direct people that are directly responsible to the PAG regional director, and that all correspondence be done through Mr. Benavides.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Nay. Based on my point.
Chair, can I just clarify? I just want to make sure though, with respect to peers, I'm hearing town manager, city manager, and county manager.
Yes.
Sure.
That was
Okay.
my
Yes.
expectation. Yes.
And Chairman Ucapicio gets 2.
Yeah, this is my concern, not because of Peter.
That is an idea.
It should go to the chief executive of the tribe and the nation as well, right? I mean, of course.
Yeah, our structure is a little different, so I will talk
I
to you
apologize.
and let everybody know if it's not my choices.
Well, with Cody's, well, you would get one, sir, but there's somebody else.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
It's fine.
Yeah. All right, we'll move on to item 13, which is. Department officers. Ayes, nays.
Yeah, keep going. Who said nay? Got
guys want to take 5 minutes?
Yeah, please.
Wonderful.
Sir, good job, Regional Counsel.
Yeah.
Buddy back, 1, 2. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have to count. You ready, everybody?
Ready.
We'll call the meeting to order. Do we have any calls to the audience?
You're not, Mr. Chair.
We don't.
We do not.
We don't, okay. Wow, we can get out of here. Approval of the March meeting.
Move to approve.
Second.
Mr. Chair, I do have one change recommended, please. Mr. Chair, just eliminate of the letter S in the last final motion of the minutes. I did go back and listen to it. It was the motion that coming out of executive session I made. It's got an S on members, but it was a very specific motion for the actions of a member, and it was something we all signed. So I just would like to clarify it's not a plural S in the end of that one.
Do we need to amend the motion, Mr.?
I got it.
You got it?
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Wow, we're gonna get out here in 30 minutes.
You're jinxing us.
Yeah, don't be.
Item 4,
Famous last words.
Mr. Chair, again, that's a consent item for information.
any action items on there?
Yeah, no, if there are any questions, we have a chance to answer your question.
Okay. Item 5.
Mr. Chair, item 5 is approval of the RTA budget. Jamie again is going to provide a brief presentation for you. Before he does that, I want to acknowledge the work of our staff that have been tracking our budget, and they are doing a really good job of making sure that the budget is very comprehensive and addresses all the needs for the next fiscal year. So with that, Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Mohini, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA board. It's my pleasure to bring forward to you the RTA recommended budget for fiscal year 2024. And you can see on the slide, we've included James Tower, RTA budget coordinator, who's really spent a lot of time developing this budget and has worked in previous years to develop it as well. So thank you for James for all of his work. And if we have questions, we may ask James to help address those.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
can I ask that you just speak a little louder? I can't hear.
Yes, I can try to speak up. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
I'll try to lean forward. I think I need to move these visors.
That helps.
There you go. Yeah, that would
I'll
be
try to
nice.
do this. Yes, I'm a little too tall. Thank you for that comment.
Any
Make sure you
questions
can hear
on
me.
that budget?
I'll try to make this brief.
Before we start.
In terms of the RTA budget process, it's similar to previous years. So we start with the revenue estimates, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. Followed by looking at the expenditure budget, and it's based primarily on the 5-year transportation improvement program, but also any intergovernmental agreements or IGAs that are in process. The budget adoption is required prior to the new fiscal year, which starts July 1st. And as typical, the rollover of unexpected funds will occur after the close of the fiscal year. In terms of the revenue budget, the RTA transaction privilege tax collections are stronger than expected. For the first 10 months of fiscal year 2023, collections are at just over $99 million with 8.4% year-over-year growth. According to the Eller Economic Business and Research Center 22 forecast for fiscal year 2024 in terms of revenues, that's at just over $119 million. For comparison, for fiscal year 23, last year's budget, the revenue forecast was just over $107 million, again, based on the EBRC forecast. So for the recommended revenue budget, the TPT revenue would be $119,070,000. And for other revenues, including grants and maintenance of effort, just over $9 million, for a total RTA revenue budget of $128,282,000. In terms of the expenditure budget, the expenditures are generally consistent with the adopted PAG 22 through 2026 TIP. For the roadway element, just over $25 million of RTA funding is expected to be expended. For the environmental and economic vitality element, just under $6 million of RTA funding is expected to be expended. And finally, for the transit element, just over $29 million of RTA funding. For debt service, that is estimated to be just under $30 million, and administrative expenses at 1.722. This is similar to last year's forecast for administrative expenses. So in terms of the expenditure budget that is recommended, it is $91,848,700. So when we look at the budget in terms of in totality, you see at the very top, we have the recommended estimated revenue, again, 128,282,000. When we subtract out the estimated expenditures, our estimated budget contingency is 36,433,300. The RTA is required to set aside a 10% reserve of excise tax revenue. So that reserve would be 11,907,000. So that leaves the RTA with an estimated unrestricted budget contingency of 24,526,300. In terms of future activities, the RTA board at its sole discretion can allocate up to 24,526,300 in RTA eligible supplemental funding in fiscal year 2024. The RTA fiscal year 2023 to 2024 rollover will begin with the final check run of fiscal year 2023. And consistent with the recommendations of the RTA audit, RTA staff will continue to coordinate regularly with lead agencies for updated cost and cash flow estimates. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA board. With that, I'm happy to take questions. And again, this is an action item.
Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'm eating my snacks. My question is, just wanting to make sure that the budget, since it's a short-term budget, is that we're budgeting for First Avenue, that we have enough fund budgeted for First Avenue. At our last meeting, we voted 6-2 to execute a 4-lane enhanced First Avenue project with the city of Tucson. So the city of Tucson hasn't heard yet or received a signed IGA by the RTA executive director. So I just want to make sure that First Avenue, that we have enough budgeted for First Avenue so that we can commence the work that this board approved.
Mr. Chair, members of the RTA board, Mayor Romero, my understanding is that the budget includes the $5 million that's incorporated into that IGA that is in process. And I'm looking at Mr. That is correct.
Yes, Mr. Maxwell is looking at me, Mr. Chair, Mr. Maxwell, without asking a question. I'm answering your question. Yes, so as Jamie mentioned, the budget identifies anything that's in the approved tip, in addition to any IGAs approved by this body. And the 5 million is included in that. There's a list of projects in your packet, and it's identified as $5 million for that project in your packet.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Any councilman or council member?
That's okay. You can do more.
Mayor Murphy.
Move to approve resolution 2023-04. I already have a second.
Seconded by Chairman Lucio. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I just have a follow-up question. We have not received a signed IGA copy for our First Avenue project. So I just am wondering about being able to expend funds without a signed IGA by the executive director.
The IGA was approved by the board, and I believe it's signed and approved, so we'll make sure.
We'll have to follow
We'll
up
make
because
sure.
we haven't.
Yeah, once it's approved by the body, we're authorized to proceed.
Haven't received a signed copy, and as the mayor, I know for a fact that I need to sign either the night of or the following day on intergovernmental agreements or other legal documents in order to have those decisions be finalized. So we do need an IGA, a signed IGA by both.
Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, that document was initially approved by city, and you had signed that initially, then it was approved by RTA board. It was signed by RTA board as well.
We will have to look into it, but just wanted to follow up on that.
Thank you. Item 6.
Mr. Chair, item 6 is the same item as the MOU with PAG, so both governing bodies have to approve the same document. So with that, I request your approval.
Motion by
Discussion?
Facio and seconded by Mayor Murphy. Mayor Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to expound on the, there's language in the MOU that it's no interference language, which first appear in the MOU from fiscal year 2018-2019 and was not included in the fiscal year 2017-2018 memo. The MOU includes a clause that the executive director will coordinate all activities of the PAG Regional Council and RTA board without interference by others. Can you explain that?
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to, and Thomas can chime in. I believe at the time that was at the request of the RTA chair. At the time, I don't recall who the chair was, but that was included in coordination with the attorney, and that's a standard language for most of those agreements.
Can you further describe that, Mr. Benavides?
Sure. Members of the board, I don't remember exactly how it came out. I do remember when the change was made, but I don't remember what the circumstance was that caused it, or that who's. I just can't remember.
What does it mean? Can you describe to us what it means? Why
I think
how is defined?
I think it's supposed to be like I take it to be like a no micromanaging kind of thing. That the executive director performs his duties without micromanagement, but that's kind of a broad term. I just can't remember. I can find the language, but that's the way I would take it. A lot of entities are sensitive about micromanagement.
Mr. Chair, when I read through it as a layman on this, it would basically just says we as board members, the way I take it is we can't interfere with the conduct of PAG RTA. In other words, we couldn't go to David and tell him, hey, you need to do this. It took me reading it twice. That may again because my lack of understanding, but that's what I would take away from it, reading it as it's currently written is.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Mr. Maxwell, I believe at the time, ICMA has a standard language on some of these policies. And at the time, I believe that's where it came from. Most city managers also have the same provision in their agreements as well.
Mr. Chair, and I would agree with General Maxwell. I saw it and read it as more of an unduly influencing, because as a council, we've had council members, not recently, but before, going and directing department heads individually as a council member without coming to the full body. So that's how I read it as well.
Everybody good? Board's pleasure.
Make the motion.
Well, seconded to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Item 7.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, so as you all recall, we are having very good ongoing dialogue between multiple committees now. We have the Citizens Committee, we have the TMC, as well as a working group of the TMC and the CAC, which is a combination of a smaller group between the two standing committees. So the working group consists of all 9 jurisdictions and 6 of the CAC members. There's been a lot of activity, a lot of good ongoing back and forth discussion. So we have multiple suggested motions on here for you. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go in order to hopefully move things along. The very first one I would like you to act on is the bottom one, which is appointment of Mr. DeBonis to be a liaison from TMC to CAC. Mr. John Bernal was in that capacity, and he is no longer interested to continue. And so that's the first motion I ask you to consider before I move on to the rest of the presentation.
So moved.
Second.
I thought that was the most difficult one. No, I'm teasing.
All in favor? Opposed?
Thank you. The second item, and now I'm going to pass it on to Paki here in a minute. The first and second item on the list is going to require some discussion, obviously. So we'll come back to any potential motion. But the first one, I just want to make sure you all know that the intent of the first action on there is just that you as a board have an opportunity, a really broad and an open opportunity to consider any recommendations, any direction to the CAC and staff. But we're not asking you to make any recommendations today unless you feel like you want to do that. But for the purpose of having an opportunity for the board to act, we put that on the agenda. So there's notice given to the public that you may potentially direct us. I don't have any recommendations for you today on that item, but that's obviously at your pleasure. And then, like I said, the second item we'll come back to, and that's going to require a little bit more discussion. But before I do that, I'll acknowledge again Mr. McGovern here, our chair of the CAC. He's doing a wonderful job, and also Terry Rosema is the other liaison to the CAC. He's been attending almost all the meetings, and so both of them are here available to answer any questions you may have or give any updates. They can do that. But before that, I'll pass it on to Paki.
Thank you. And with that, I'll take any questions. No, just kidding. Thank you, Mr. Ravini. I just want to give you a brief update on the RTA Next activities in addition to what you received in your packet. As you know, we're moving forward with the development of the RTA Next.
Just a second. Speak.
Oh, sorry.
Or can you hold it like
Want me to hold it?
it helped a lot?
Hope I don't drop it.
There you go. That's much better.
So what we're trying to do is move forward with the development of the RTA Next plan and identifying the list of named projects. So the activities since your last board meeting that have occurred is the CAC met twice during the month of April and again twice during the month of May. And what they've been doing is reviewing the categorical elements. These elements are the ones that are based on the breakdown that you, the board, provided to us. And we've been moving forward with that. And there have been, some options and some suggestions by the CAC members. But basically, we're looking at the transit element, still allocating that at 510 million, in other words, 27%. The safety element for 170 million at 9%. And what was called the environmental and economic vitality element at 110 million, 5.8%, is one of the elements that's been broken down, one environment and one economic. And right now the CAC is having discussions about what that would look like. There has also been discussion about moving the business assistance program and administrative. So there's been some very good discussions on the categoricals. And again, these percentages are the same as the current plan. And that's just after we account for any of the deferred projects that are moving forward, the contingency and the debt service. In the meantime, the RTA Technical Management Committee reconvened the ad hoc TMC working group. And this working group, as Farhad mentioned, consists of a member of each of the member jurisdictions and 6 CAC members. This group has been very busy and has met 3 times this past month to review and refine the list of named projects. The working group ranked the projects, and then they approved a motion to fully fund the projects that were ranked 1 through 7 with a balance. This left a balance of approximately 75 million on the table. And this balance, the working group had suggested be allocated to the city of Tucson to distribute among their lowest ranking projects. So the city and has been in discussions during the working group with that. We are scheduling another meeting for next week. There has been no formal feedback from the CAC, although much discussion and many questions. But no formal feedback yet on the refined list proposed by the working group, and they'll still be looking at that. And we also have a meeting next week with the CAC. And then the CAC is going to continue to meet as often as needed. So if we need to move to weekly meetings, we may need to do that to complete the review and recommendations of the draft plan. As you know, we're still working with that timeline that was originally proposed with the July 1 deadline. And then, as Farhad mentioned, the suggested action items that were shown previously are, for your deliberation. So I can get back to that. Or maybe Crystal can. And with that, again, our CAC chair, Tom McGovern, is in attendance, as is Carrie Rosenau, our TMC CAC liaison, in case there's additional information they want to provide, or if you have any questions for any of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question for Mr. McGovern. That first action item up there, is there any language contained in there or any other language that would help for getting direction from the regional council to communicate with the CAC?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Mayor. The second action item is probably number one, I would suppose at this point, as far as the CAC is concerned.
Okay.
Knowing what all to cram into the 5-pound bag, which is now at around 15 pounds, is going to be difficult. So knowing, where you all stand on kind of the nuances as well as the big picture of maintenance being included would be very helpful. And I know that a lot of the CAC members believe that maintenance in some form is appropriate. We've not acted on it in any way, and I'm not making a recommendation to you about that. I can just pass on that some of our conversations have certainly leaned that way.
And Mr. Chair, just a follow up, probably for Thomas maybe or Farhad. I always thought that routine maintenance was not statutorily eligible. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair and members of the board, I would say, in my opinion, no, it's routine maintenance is not something that the RTA is supposed to spend its funds on.
Okay, thanks.
So, Mr. Chair,
I might want to make a comment. Romero and I were talking about this. Many different connotations to maintenance and road reconstruction. And I use Prince Road as an example. If you go in and tear out a major portion of a road and rebuild it because of flooding or something like that, that's really not maintenance. I'm thinking maintenance is filling potholes or painting stripes on streets or replanting trees or something. But, I think there's a broad kind of misconception that major construction projects are really not maintenance.
May I speak about this? A couple of things. I would love to hear from both the TMC representative and the CAC representative at every one of our meetings. I think it's very helpful to clarify what the conversations that the RTA board is having for you all, and that we can help clarify some of the concerns that are coming both from the TMC and the CAC. So I am going to ask that we have a separate agenda item, Mr. Chair, that basically is for CAC, TMC updates to the RTA board. This time around, it was fine because even though we stated very clearly at our last meeting that we wanted an agenda item for updates, it was not included, but we were told that we could talk about it in this item. So that is for additional conversation later. On your point, Mayor Honey, we have been talking about it. What is the clarification that we need to make sure that we help define a category that is for pavement reconstruction and modernization. I think that's the language that is much more appropriate to what we're thinking could possibly be a category. And according to the legal memorandum sent by Mr. Benavides to the RTA board members, May 18th, it's very clear. Maintenance is not a responsibility of the RTA. But in your own words, Mr. Benavides, the RTA next plan could include a well-defined roadway improvement program that provides funding for resurfacing specific problematic roadways in state of disrepair, which could be measured for the periodic state performance audit. So that is closer to what Mayor Honey and I have been talking about that could be included in the RTA next. It's much more reconstruction and modernization of the road without having to expand, and much less unacceptable would be regular maintenance like restriping, pothole repair, anything like that. So I think that we need to define based on our attorney's definition of what can be considered for the RTA next. I tend to go for the pavement reconstruction and modernization language because that gives it more of a definition closer to what Mr. Benavides is recommending we do.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I was hoping we can save that for last, but we can have that conversation.
Jump right in.
We can have that conversation if you like. It's really at your pleasure, but I just want to make sure that that is what we're asking for, to confirm that the CAC can consider capital maintenance projects only and no other routine maintenance. So that's the suggested action.
Mr. Chair, quick question just because I agree. And I guess I think sometimes when we talk routine maintenance, I think we all make the assumption that that's filling potholes, maybe a resurfacing of a road. And I think we're all in agreement that's not the purpose of the RTA. And I just want to make sure exactly that is what you're talking about. When we talk capital maintenance, we're talking about something that's going to consist of reconstruction or modernization of a road. I mean, you look at Broadway. Yes, we expanded it, but it also put a brand new pavement down that effectively took a road that was in pretty bad shape and made it now pristine. So I just want to make sure the clarification.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Maxwell, that is by our definition, and that's why Mr. Benavides provided the legal opinion to make sure that we can describe reconstruction as capital maintenance. So that is when the condition of the pavement is poor, by definition, and there are indices that we use to define the condition of the pavement. If the condition of the pavement is poor, therefore it's qualified to be reconstructed, and that is by definition capital maintenance.
Mr. Chair, just one follow-up question. So of either the categoricals or named, do we have monies sort of set aside if we, clarify this definition as, the capital maintenance? Do you have to take monies from other places, or how would that work in your mind?
If you don't mind, let me address that because it was in the comment, in the opinion. So by definition, it has to be a named capital maintenance project. Limits from point A to point B. Where the money comes from, that's all up to the CAC and the board to decide, but it has to be named specific.
Such as Broadway, as General Maxwell came up. I mean, that is road capital maintenance, road construction, but it was a named project.
So again, keep in mind the intent. The intent is for the voters when they go to vote for RTA next, to identify specifically which roads are going to be reconstructed. They need to have that information.
Mr. Chair and Mayor Honey, you've got a ride home today if you needed Gary's got to get out of here. Otherwise, I'd have to stop asking questions.
Still not gonna vote with you all the
Yeah.
time.
So that brings up another issue, because one of the things I think is challenging here, and what I heard from a lot of the concerns and discussions going on in the CAC, and one of the stumbling points is we've got this big pot of money in named projects. And then you've got your categories, and they're all going, and there was even a discussion on, we as a board have moved forward from the categoricals into the named projects, but quite often these named projects fit inside some of these categoricals. And I know that, and Chair McGovern, please clarify if I'm misspeaking here, but I think there's a movement to try to take some of these and put them into those categoricals, because it really even further demonstrates, if you have a named project in a categorical, where this money is being spent. Because if you read these 37 proposed projects right now, the named projects, they're not all just straight roadway corridor elements. Yeah, there's some multimodal ones in there, but then we've got subcategoricals that address those multimodal capabilities too. So I guess what I'm asking for clarification, because I believe some of the members of the CAC would like to show some of these named projects potentially in the categoricals, because it does then give a better picture of what's being done going forward in the community. And as I interpret it, that's okay, but
Mr. Chair, Mr. Maxwell, and I apologize, Tom, I want you to answer it as well, but I think you can do anything you want to do, and you can put named projects anywhere you want. My recommendation is to clearly have a section of named projects regardless of what the scope is.
And I don't disagree with that, Executive Director. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we can identify, there are some that you go through, you go, okay, that is absolutely in the bike and ped categorical that they're talking about creating. And if we don't identify it, I think it's very important that we can have a list of named projects so that when the citizens see it on the ballot, here they are.
Yeah.
But I also think it's beneficial to everyone to identify and not put things in these named projects that we don't acknowledge that this is going towards bike and pet efforts, or if this is going to environmental or animal safety. I mean, you've got to show that stuff. Otherwise, it all gets lost here. Then everybody just focuses on the categoricals or something.
From a process perspective, the working group is having that same dialogue. So I would recommend allow them to work through that and come back with a recommendation. But I think they're asking the same questions as you were.
And Executive Director, thank you for the clarification. I think the thing was there was some belief amongst some of the members that you can't do that.
No. Again, ultimately, this board can come back and reshuffle everything and say, I'm going to define this as X, Y, and Z. That's up to you ultimately. Their recommendation, obviously, at this point is name what you can, and the ones that you can name, put under the buckets.
Thank you.
Well,
Would it be appropriate at this point, Mr. Chair, Mr. McGovern's already up here. Could we ask Mr. Rosema and Mr. DeBonis to join him so that the board could get a report on what the working group is focused on? Would it be appropriate to do that at this point, Mr. Chair?
we can ask, sure. Might cost a little more, but hey.
And why they're coming up, maybe Thomas can answer this, because I think it's good dialogue, whether it's in the categorical or name. I don't actually, because I was only here 3 years at 2006, because my concern is I want the residents to know specifically, not, trust us, we're going to have a pot of money for this and that. So when we talk about name projects, that's obvious, and they will appear on the ballot as actually named projects. How would the categoricals appear on the ballot? Will it be a pot of money? And they not have an understanding of what this is going to go to? Because to me, it's about the voters.
Well, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I think that would be explained in the publicity.
Okay.
Public would get that information. There's a requirement that we have a really thorough publicity.
Right.
So that's where it would be explained, not so much on the ballot.
I guess that makes me a little nervous because I'm not sure how many people read the voter pamphlet, and I'm just not clear on what the ballot language would look like.
Why don't we let Mr. McGovern continue with his presentation?
Yes.
Sorry to, we're very passionate about this, as you can see.
I love it, Mr. Chairman. This is kind of conversation, particularly that the working group has been having, but take you back a couple of months to when the Citizen Advisory Committee asked staff to help them group all the projects, for the 37 projects that we have that are, kind of in our master list, in order to understand what types of projects they were. And, a big chunk of those were City of Tucson projects, which have been categorized as modernization, as the mayor referred to a minute ago. And that's been very helpful to us because we've seen, corridor projects, we've seen operational, and it's helped us understand the types of projects that we have. One thing we've noticed in the modernization projects is that they very much are kind of capital maintenance, many of them at least. And the idea being that you pretty much replace the pavement because it's shot between the curbs, but you don't realign or rebuild the road dramatically. You may add, though, functionality. And originally, we, the CAC, was calling the grouping of projects that we now say are modernization as functionalization. Never liked the word, and I like modernization better. But the point was that if you have a project, not a Broadway, but say a 5th, 6th Street or some other Drexel Road or something, that you have pretty much everything there except for all the important amenities such as sidewalks, bike lanes, proper drainage, all the other things that make a complete street, as we all know that term to be. So it's interesting that I think we have these separate kind of descriptions of the types of projects in groups, and that may turn out to be a way of presenting those named projects on the ballot as well. If you're going to say that we have capital maintenance, or you want to call it reconstruction, or you want to call it modernization, grouping those so that people can see the types of projects that would be coming in, I think is really important. We know that people are, that from our own feedback from community members who are members of the CAC, as well as questionnaires that we conducted some few years ago, the condition of the roadways in the community is priority number one. Capacity, unlike 20 years ago, when we started RTA 1, is important, but it's no longer necessarily the most important issue. Depends where you live, though. And we've found now that in the outer areas outside of the city core, capacity remains an issue. And yet within the city, these modernization projects are by far the most needed types of projects. So sorry to ramble, but I think that this mirrors the kinds of conversations both at the CAC and from what I've observed in participating in this working group with the TMC.
So the clarity that we're having a discussion right now will help the CAC move forward.
I believe so, definitely, Mayor Romero. We are proceeding as Farhad has described it, with naming of projects within some of those categories where it's appropriate. We know transit makes sense. We did that last time in RTA 1. Safety is probably another area because a number of these modernization projects, if you will, are largely about safety on those individual routes. So anticipate that we'll talk a lot more about that, and that's kind of on our agenda for Tuesday.
General Maxwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to go somewhere else, but Chair McGovern, since you're there, I'm going to ask you. I've had feedback from several members of the Citizens Advisory Committee, kind of saying you're at a, maybe I won't call it a quagmire, but a lot of the same issues come up time and time again. And what I'd like to ask you is, what do you think's the biggest impediment to you continuing to move forward? And are you getting all the information you need as a group to move forward?
Mr. Chairman, General Maxwell, yes, we receive all the information we need. Sometimes we wish we could have it the next day, but you recognize how many times we meet, and now we're meeting all the time, and the working group is also meeting all the time, and all of us are making demands on information from staff, and we get it. We don't get it the next day necessarily, but I have never really been in an organization where that would have been possible anyway. But in general, yes, we receive the information that we need. Clarification is sometimes difficult because we have strong personalities on the CAC, and some of them want to dive deeper into decisions or dive deeper into explanations, and all that's appropriate. Certainly, one of the reasons why we're down to the last month of the self-imposed deadline, I guess. I'm not sure if where you all stand on that part of the equation, but we're certainly doing our best to deliver by the end of this fiscal year.
Chair McGovern, Mr. Chair, you mentioned that 1 July being a deadline is, and again, I think something we've talked about has kind of been the deadline since the beginning. I think it's been a deadline that I'm not sure exactly how we got to, because we never talked about why July 1st, because we didn't start it from the backside. What vote are we trying to get to? And that's a whole nother discussion. But is having that looming over you making you do anything that you'd rather do otherwise? So if you knew there was more flexibility on that due date, would it help or hurt your process?
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to meet every week.
I don't think people have the time to.
I don't know if that's an appropriate answer to your question or not, but we're going as fast as we can, and unfortunately, sausage making is messy and it's very time consuming. So we're doing the best we can to get to where we are. We'll certainly let you know if we're just not able to meet that, but it's certainly our priority to do that. It would be good to know how you feel about that process, and if you'd like to see us meeting, for 4 hours every week. I'm not sure I can get a quorum for it, but we'll certainly do the best we can to get that across the finish line.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair McGovern, I want to commend you and your colleagues on the TMC for forming the ad hoc working group, because I hear frequently from Mr. DeBonis and Ms. Lesher about how that group is helping to move this entire process forward. So I wonder if we could ask you and your two colleagues to share with us what has the working group accomplished so far and what remains to be determined.
I think, Supervisor, I'll pass the torch here.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I appreciate your comments because I think you're getting really accurate information from Mr. DeBonis and from Jan Lesher. I think the group is working really well together, and everybody's kind of looking at the big picture and understanding what needs to be done in order to get to the finish line, and we're working toward those things. Still, obviously, guarding the interest of our own jurisdictions, but being really open. And although there's sometimes disagreement, it has been disagreement without being disagreeable. And so at this point, we've done I think a really yeoman's job. I mean, we had 118 projects, got it down to 37. Now we've got the 37. We had and I think it was kind of alluded to here a little bit earlier, but we had a motion a couple of meetings ago to basically take all of the top 7 projects of every jurisdiction. And and push those forward, and that would get us to the number we needed to get to. Plus leave us 75 million additional. Now, not every jurisdiction has 7 projects. There's a couple that only have 2 projects. Tonawanda has 3. I think the county may have 6 projects. So I think City of Tucson is the only one that has 7 projects. So that meant that they had another 9 projects that weren't going to be funded. They were the modernization projects. But the motion that was made took the 75 million that was left over and gave all that to the City of Tucson to be able to apply to the modernization projects. Now, the City of Tucson then did a phenomenal job of evaluating all of their projects that they had still in the modernization, and they were able to do some massaging with those, and that's where we're at right now. We're trying to look for ways to get as many of those projects into the plan as we can, and I think we're making really good progress. We've got a meeting next week, Thursday, to hopefully move the needle on that. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of where we're at right now. And one of the big questions for us is, looking at some of those remaining projects and identifying where some of those fit in some of the buckets, because there are a number of them that would fit in traffic safety, that would fit in pedestrian. So, kind of identifying some of that and where some of that money may be available. And I think it was our opinion too, the same as what General Maxwell pointed out earlier, that the more projects that we have named and identified, instead of a bucket that just says, hey, we've got 50 million here, what are you going to do with that? Well, just trust us. We'll do something nice with it, right? So, but the more projects, our opinion is the more projects. I think the prevailing opinion, I'll say that the prevailing opinion is the more projects that we have identified in some of those buckets, the more palatable it is to the voters. So that's kind of where, in a nutshell, where we're at.
So, Mr. Chair,
I don't know if you want to add.
The working group is doing a good job of resolving all of the differences and concerns between the various jurisdictions, and is also working on coming up with a comprehensive set of recommendations from both the CAC and the TMC that eventually come to us. And you're also trying to take into consideration to follow up on points that have been made both by Mayor Murphy and General Maxwell of what's likely to look good on the ballot. What's likely to appeal to voters regardless of where they live in the county.
I think that's exactly right. And I didn't give Carmine an opportunity to come up here and say anything if you wanted to, but I think that's exactly right. So one of the things that staff is doing for us is taking all the remaining projects and putting it on a map for us so we can see if there's any holes, if you will, that aren't really covered, where voters are going to be looking, hey, what are we getting out of this kind of thing? I will say, I don't know that there's really a lot of discussion in the ad hoc meeting about advancing where the CAC is. Those discussions are significantly different, where they're kind of getting hung up, if you will, is a much different place than where we are. So I think they have some questions, and they're amongst themselves more than anything about where the money is being spent and wanting larger amounts of money in other areas than where it currently is.
So could I ask then, Mr. Chair, Chair McGovern, ultimately, will the CAC as an entire CAC vote on the recommendations that come out of the ad hoc working group?
Mr. Chair, Supervisor, our intention is to continue working back and forth between the two, between the TMC and the CAC. And this is our way of kind of collapsing that back and forth process by having this working group, so that those CAC issues can be brought forward, can be worked on together with TMC, as well as those same things that the TMC is working on can be passed back very quickly and, vetted almost at the same time between the two. So the answer to the question is yes, we'll be looking
At some point.
at some point at those issues. Some of the foundational issues that Terry just alluded to, could create a plan that looked considerably different than the stock plan that we're kind of going forward with. Remember, the board said $1.1 billion for named corridor projects and $790 million for the various buckets. And the CAC is looking at how to distribute those as well as the initial 1.1 billion. And just as the working group is looking to see how we can fund more of those, remember we were about $300 million over that nominal $1.1 billion budget. So on the one hand, the working group is looking at how to fund those named projects. On the other hand, we know that if we do, we'll suck money out of each of those buckets, and there'll be even less of that money for the board to allocate as conditions change and as priorities change within the region over a 20-year budget period. So there's still a lot of moving parts, I guess, is my best response.
Mayor Rivera person is Mr. Rangini.
I'm really happy to hear from the representatives of the TMC and the CAC, and that we can have this conversation. I want to make sure that I stress our position and the position that I have as the mayor of Tucson. I am absolutely 100% supportive of the concept of the RTA next. And that's why we've remained at this table, because I believe in the power of working together as a region. And so one of the things that I talked about at my council's meeting on Tuesday is that our needs might be different. The city of Tucson is a 200-year-old city and has very, very different needs, as you very well said, Mr. McGovern, than the towns that surround us. And so for the city of Tucson, since it's the region's core, the oldest city in this region, we need to focus on some reconstruction and modernization, which includes, like you said, a complete street. We still have streets in the city of Tucson that is just a street, and it doesn't have any room for bikes, and it doesn't have any sidewalks. There's no pedestrian bicycle infrastructure. I believe that's a reconstruction and modernization element that we need for the city of Tucson. So I guess, long story short, I know that Sam Credio and our city manager, Michael Ortega, have put together a plan that could work for all of us. And using the framework that we have, and by the way, the framework is not tattooed in our foreheads. We can change some of the language in the categories in the framework that actually make it clear and transparent for the voters to understand that the safety element might have safety and modernization in it. Right now, the safety element, to your point, Mayor Murphy, doesn't really call out projects. It says intersection safety and capacity improvements, $70 million. And that framework was approved by the voters back in 2006. It didn't have as much specificity in terms of names of projects, because it gives that flexibility that General Maxwell gave us in his motion back in January of 22, basically saying that it reduces rigidity of the plan and provides flexibility for changing technology and transportation demands. That's what we all voted on unanimously back in January of 2022. So the framework should be able to reflect that, right? And so again, back to the language about maintenance, it really is about being able to reflect that need of modernizing, reconstructing, and including safety elements for the roadways that are needed, whoever needs it, right? And so I want to be able to get to a point with advice from the CAC and the TMC where we all feel comfortable, whatever the element, wherever we put our projects in, but that it works fairly for all of us. And so I guess that's my advice and input as you continue having conversations and discussions, that you do have a definition from our attorney as to what reconstruction and modernization and maintenance means, so that you can include it in the conversation for your elements.
Mr. Chairman, Mayor Romero, this is precisely what the CAC is attempting to do at this point. And I know that the working group is tackling it as well. And from those two directions, I think we are going to end up with a plan that meets both, the guidelines, if you will, that you've expressed and which we've heard already from Director Credio and Manager Ortega on more than one occasion. And I anticipate that it'll be a plan that addresses the needs of all the communities in the region. And if it doesn't, then, we've failed and you should send us back for more weekly meetings.
Thank you.
Mr. Martinez.
Mr. Chair, and thank you again, Tom and Terry and Carmine, all of you all. They're really working, in my opinion, towards the common goal. And that's really important for you all to recognize that ultimate goal is to have a draft plan that we can take it out to the public. That is the next step. That's the step that we're going to get feedback from the public and come back and fill in the blank. So as Mayor Murphy was saying, let's describe those categories. Let's make sure they understand what those categories are. That's still yet to be done with feedback from the public. So that'll take probably good, in my opinion, 6 months plus. So keep that in mind. We're still kind of in a phase that I would still call it a draft plan. It's a draft plan. We'll go through the public process. We'll continue to have this conversation, fine tune it, make adjustments, make as many changes as needed before we actually have a document that everybody feels comfortable with. So again, appreciate all of them. They're truly committed. Mr. Dilly here has been taking a leadership role as well, and he's been engaging with a lot of folks. So I want to thank all of them. So this really takes a team effort. It's the entire team, staff, TMC members, working group members, but truly this working group concept, and they are actually working. They're rolling up their sleeves and actually working. So I think that's really where we're going to hopefully get some, going back to your question, hopefully get some movement. So this way we can take it back to the full CAC and then have that final document, draft document for you. So with that, Mr. Chair, I really want to get an action on item 2. If you're okay, I recommend approving that motion so we can move the conversation forward.
Board's pleasure.
Mr. Chair, I would make that second motion, but add to it that the board directs the CAC and TMC to consider their work aligned with the motion that we passed in our March meeting, which they're doing.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Can you, for clarity, Mr. Chair? Can you describe the March motion that we did? I just want to make sure that I'm voting on something that I agree on.
Could you, Ms. Ontiveros? Thank you so much. I mean, I remember what I said, but I don't remember it word for word. And I knew as soon as I caught her eye, I knew she'd have it at her fingertips.
Okay.
So you're doubling up on your motions on this.
I-
This one and redoing another one that you've already
That's
done.
in the minutes of the last meeting in your packet as well.
The working group really was formed in the wake of that motion. And the working group has made substantial progress since March. So Mr. McGovern told us that the second motion listed on this screen was very important in terms of providing clarity to the CAC. So I think you're very nice. Thank you. Okay. So the motion is to affirm that routine maintenance is not statutorily eligible for RTA funding. Capital maintenance may be considered if funding is available within budget, and to affirm the motion from our March meeting directing PAG RTA staff to provide TMC CAC with all information necessary to make recommendations to the RTA board on the roadway element, such as the previously requested ADOT project funding scenarios, and to enable the TMC CAC to have a comprehensive discussion and make recommendations to the RTA board on all RTA plan elements: roadway, transit, safety, environmental, economic vitality.
And may I ask a couple of questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Would,
I think Mayor Murphy second.
Yeah, second.
would this also include reconstruction and modernization of roadways?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and my understanding was that they were having those conversations. Is that accurate to say, gentlemen? All right. Yes, ma'am.
And then also that the language that Mr. Benavides provided us in terms of that the RTA next plan could include a well-defined roadway improvement program that provides funding for resurfacing specific problematic roadways. Is that also the intent of your motion?
I certainly think
Okay.
so, and I think his I think Mr. Benavides' opinion was not only instructive to this board, but to committees of this board.
Okay, I just
And
wanted to make sure that was embedded in the motion.
Now
Thank
you sound like a lawyer.
I'm
You want to
trained.
redo your motion in its entirety?
With my inclusions.
We all generally know what we're talking about here. We're trying to do something to make it work.
Yeah.
And
Maybe that should be the motion.
right.
Continue to make it work.
Time is of the essence here.
Right.
And if we need to move that July 1 a couple of months, we have to move it. But I'm not going to mention that the former Tucson mayor was the one that made the motion for July 1st, but we'll throw Jonathan under the bus. He's not here. But any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously.
Wonderful job.
And we're out of here before 6.
Yeah.
Is there a motion? Oh, Mr.
Chair, I'm willing to make the motion of what we haven't taken yet, and that's that first action up there. We voted on the providing feedback.
Well, the first action was obviously more broad for any additional information that would help mostly Mr. McGovern if he needed any other support from the board. Based on my conversation with him, I think we're in a good place. So that's why we don't have a recommendation.
I think we are, and if we don't need to take it up, however, the only thing that concerned me is he talked about potentially going to weekly meetings. There was a lot of problems with that. I think it's stressful. It's not gonna be any good. Just wanted to confirm based on our previous discussion in preparation for this meeting that we are looking at having a June meeting.
Oh, yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
So it's really at the board's pleasure. Having a conversation with both our representatives on the TMC liaisons and the CAC, they felt they were going to meet weekly, and my preference is to allow them to keep doing what they're doing. I don't believe there is a need for this board to meet again until they have a recommendation, but that's up to this board to make that decision. But I think they have what they need to continue doing what they need to do.
So then I'd like to ask, Mr. Chair, if I could, I'd like to ask the three of them how we've got them there. If we're not going to meet again for 2 months, and I think a lot of people on this board know I've been an advocate that the RTA, not the full PAG RTA thing, but the RTA should be meeting monthly just to talk with these three gentlemen about what can we answer to you now? Because quite often they won't know they've got something they need to go to the board with until it comes up at one of their meetings. And if we're not meeting for 2 months, that makes it very difficult. Now, I'll be honest, depending what the dates are selected, I may miss some. There may be other ones you're gonna miss. But I do believe if we're asking them to do everything they can do to get to that next step, we should consider making sure we have at least a meeting once a month. And in those off months from the PAG RTA connection, it's just at the discretion of the chairs. You can set it for an hour maximum, whatever. Just have them be able to come in, provide an update, and ask us if there's anything they need clarification from us on. Because I think today's was very effective.
Biggest issue with June and July are horrible months for meetings.
I know.
And I'm going to be out of town 2 or 3 weekends in those 2 months. And I think a lot of other people are as well. It's pretty hard if we're just going to have an RTA meeting like in June. Are we going to have a good turnout? And who's going to be here and what's going on? I just.
So we're asking them, with all due respect, Mr. Chair, we're asking them to work harder to get to a July 1st deadline. And we don't even have a board meeting before July 1st.
Mr. Chair, if I may, General Maxwell, as you know, obviously, if there is a need for a meeting, we'll make sure that we'll identify hopefully a date that works for the majority and work with the chair to schedule a meeting. So the chair can schedule a meeting at any time. So I'll assure you that we'll work with the group, and if there is a need for a meeting, we'll work with the chair to schedule a meeting.
Chair, I would just add, I mean, if everybody can't show up, they can't show up. It would show good faith on our part. And, you know, I like to be here in person, but if I'm traveling and I can call in for an hour, I'd be willing to do that. So I think the attempt would go a long way to show that.
General Maxwell's the vice chair of the RTA. So if I'm not here, you got to deal with
There you
him.
go.
Oh, and if we have that meeting, look out. No, but Mayor Murphy, to your point, I'm not saying this could be something that we don't hold a meeting if we can't have, we'd like to have a quorum, obviously. I've got travel plans throughout the summer as well. I may be calling in. It's just, I think they need to know if they need an answer, we can do it. And we can, if the chair is more comfortable saying, let's see if they call up and say, I need an answer, then we try to put one together. Either way.
That would be my recommendation.
But I was just gonna say, can everybody look at their calendar and say June 22nd? That would theoretically be our next monthly meeting. I can be there June 22nd.
So can I, Mayor?
Man, I don't know.
I don't know, but I'm looking. But Mr. Chair,
Yes.
also what we could do is help alleviate that pressure from the July 1st work that, you know, that they must absolutely have something July 1st. We can also help alleviate that pressure for the ad hoc committee, so we can push it down until we have, you know, another meeting set. If it's not June 22nd, it could possibly, I don't know. I'm just trying to help find, but I do agree that it's okay that we can, you know, jump in virtually. But we should make that if we're asking them to work really hard, I think it's okay for us to try and make it to a June 22nd or 21st. It doesn't have to be Thursday. You know, it could be the 21st. And depending on how our calendars look. But I feel that I think we just have to alleviate that pressure of them having to come up with something or a plan or a draft plan by the July 1st.
The one issue before Mayor Murphy is we've eventually got to have a plan, and we've got to go to the people and set up an election. And the further we kick the ball down the road, the harder that becomes. And when the motion was made 2 years ago, really, or 3 years ago, maybe, it was to try to get us to the point where if we were maybe looking at the summer of 24, if we start pushing it out too much further, it's going to put us in a tough spot. We're going to be kind of like the federal government and the debt
ceiling.
vote. The world's going to come to an end if we don't do something next week. I just don't want to move it too far. And I don't know if we could actually, Mr. Benavides, if we could even move that date, since that was a council vote, if it wasn't on the agenda. Can we do that?
I don't think it's problematic. Well, wait, I'm sorry, you're talking about the date.
Moving the date, the July 1st, kind of drop dead date to get the information.
I'd be reluctant to do it without it being on the agenda, so I would counsel against it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or Murphy and then Supervisor.
Well, one, I'm available June 22nd, and I'd rather stick to the date because it's just like I move into a bigger house and I think I'm going to have all this extra room, and then I fill it. So I think if we keep moving the date, people are going to take it, advantage, not in a bad way, but I think if we show our commitment by meeting as an RTA, can't make it, you can't, assuming you can. I think, we said that's the goal line, and I'd hate to turn a 100-yard football field into a 120-yard football field, thinking that we just keep extending the clock. Personally.
Supervisor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To follow up on the point that Mr. Benavides made about being reluctant to change the date, and what Mayor Murphy just said, I think our colleagues on the TMC and the CAC should certainly be working with July 1st in mind. Having said that, the first time this board is going to be considering what they send us is July 25th. And so I think you can look at July 1st as a soft deadline, and being mindful really of July 25th as the first time that we're going to be considering your work. Is that reasonable?
Well, what happens though on the reason it's July 25th is you got to start assigning dollar amounts and feasibility studies. Can this project be doing the first phase or the second phase or third phase, and working with each one of us? I mean, just coming up with a plan is not the end all.
Sure.
Yeah.
We've still got to put a whole bunch of other different items in there.
Mr. Chair, I can attend the 22nd virtually, so that would work. So Mayor Honey better be here. The other thing I'd say is I agree with leaving the July 1st. I haven't heard anything from anybody here today saying that they need it removed. It's not inhibiting them. They're going forward. However, at some point, I think it's going to be important for have that conversation. Why did we set July 1st? And Mayor Honey alluded to it. We need that if we're going to be on in May of 24 or summer of 24. But we have to have discussion on when is the right time to go. We heard today they think 400E is going to get on there. I'll tell you that's a soft think, because there are issues talking to the elected officials in Phoenix on what they're going to have to give up to get the legislature to come forward with it. But irrelevant to us is at some point we got to look at what's our end goal and then back off what we need to do from there. And that really will establish the deadline. Not trying to change July 1st at all. So,
Chairman, you please do.
Saw that Chairman McGovern had gotten up, and I don't know if you want to speak again, sir, but sometimes the weight that we put on ourselves and shoulders is a heavy burden. But I will ask you, hopefully maybe you can have a draft or something for the 22nd in June. I haven't committed yet, only because I can't commit unless they call and say, yes, we can be ready with some type of something to tell us, unless we're all going to save the date, and then he can tell us we're not ready yet. And then I would ask him to pick a date in June to see what would work for him, because they're the ones who are going to report to us instead of us picking it.
With that, Mr. Chairman, the 22nd is fine. And as far as July 1st goes, I have I have to be honest, I have some doubts about us completing all the work by then. Certainly the working group is making great progress. That still has to come back to the full CAC and be debated, and then that result goes back to the TMC for kind of the joint information to come to this body. So, we're doing our best. That's all I can say. And by the 22nd, we'll have something to report for sure. But if you prefer to wait and see if we have specific questions and or drafts to show you, we've got a couple of meetings, I guess, before that happens. And we can hold the meeting and or cancel it if necessary, I would say.
What we'll do is schedule a meeting for July 20.
June.
June 21st,
Second.
22nd.
21st actually
I may
works
be
better for
gone
me.
Both of those. I know I'll be gone July 1st, but we'll
21st is
say
better for me.
we're looking at a meeting July 22nd unless
First.
something changes.
21st?
21st, 22nd, whatever day you want.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank you for this. I kind of learned that through construction when I was building houses. I can want all I want, but it's the guy that's doing the work that that'll tell you if there's cement or bricks or
Right.
the lumber's not, you're not shipping
Not
it.
here,
I
right?
mean, there's no reason to meet if they're not even close to.
Yeah,
But Mr. Chair, I would say there's even more reason where they're not close, because at that point, we have to make the decision, are we still pushing for as soon as possible? Or are we going to reassess a realistic date for them to come back? Or one of the other ones, having talked with hopefully Chairman McGovern won't mind me saying this, but do we want them to bring us an 80% solution or a 70% solution if they're at a point where the next 20 or 30%, they're at a quagmire, they will never get to 100%. Because then they bring us what they've got, we know what they agree on, and we decide how to fill in those spaces. We listen to the TMC and what they've said. So I would actually say if they know they're not going to meet July 1st, it's even more important for us.
Everybody good?
Good.
Yeah. And can we consider both days, the 21st and 22nd?
We can meet both days.
I'm open both days.
Don't mind.
If it's a 12 o'clock start, I can do either one.
Okay. Everybody else good? Motion to adjourn?
Come over.
Nay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Everybody's adjourned, but they're.
That would have been 2 votes.
That's right.